Chapter 6:17. Micah is my cousin, and I have a share in his business. Micah Chamber of Commerce's business, in addition to the direct business he personally developed in the Blood War, a large part of it actually has to go through the Sigil City as a transit station. And I'm directly in charge of this part of the business. So I'm very valuable, and I can include your potion business into the purchasing system, saving you the time to establish a trade network. When Shemashaka mentioned the Micah Chamber of Commerce, Keyes felt as if he had been blessed by the goddess of fate. After all, the righteous and warm-hearted, Micah was a timely help he met on the front line of the Blood War. They had met twice. The first time, Micah gave him a precious 9-sword catalogue. The second time, Micah helped him support an entire mercenary group from another plane. Now that he was in the Sigil City, the young blue dragon really did not expect to meet Micah's cousin. Sure enough, it's a big gift at the beginning of the game. The ancients were right. Without hesitation, Keyes immediately used the dragon head warhammer loaded with mice energy nuclei to cast a greater directive on the female Yugoloth judge known as the Queen of the Underworld in the Sigil City. At the same time, in order to achieve the best charm effect, he also used his psionic ability as an aid. With the combination of spells and psionic power, Shemashaka was completely on guard. Like pouring beans out of a bamboo tube, she quickly revealed her relationship with Micah, how she wanted to establish contact with Keyes, and so on. At this time, the Queen of the Underworld was no different from an ordinary person who had been affected by the touch of the mentally retarded. And through her detailed introduction, Keyes also understood how Shemashaka participated in the operations of the Micah Chamber of Commerce, and how important this part of her work was. As a super-large Yugoloth family business chain that could connect to many worlds, the Micah Chamber of Commerce's business covered many fields. Not only did they use the caravans formed by the old hags to do business with the mortals of the material plane and the demons of the lower world, but they also hired many neutral creatures and crossed paths with some existences of the upper world. The Micah Chamber of Commerce even had more fixed partners in the astral and inner elemental world. Shemashaka was in charge of Sigil City's underground organization. Apart from being responsible for the transportation of goods, their main task was to settle accounts and exchange of currencies between different worlds. For example, even though he could travel unimpeded in the lower plane with the soul prism, he might be confiscated if he took it out in the upper plane. He would also face a similar problem if he brought the rainbow stone to the lower plane. At this time, Shemashaka's importance was highlighted. This underworld queen of Sigil City monopolized the spinach business in Sigil City. Her Wheel of Fortune casino was the most famous money-squandering den in the ladies' area. Every day, gamblers from all over the multiverse would wander in. Relying on the goodwill that had been maintained for many years, as well as the deliberate guidance of the dealers, they would exchange the currency in their hands for chips issued by the casino before walking to the gambling table. And these chips were created by a priest of goddess of wealth, Joaquin, whom Shemashaka had entrusted. They had extremely strong anti-counterfeiting effect. Under her operation, the Wheel of Fortune casino was like a financial institution, widely absorbing the various currencies that gamblers brought from various planes. It was with this fund that the Micah Chamber of Commerce's business could be successfully completed between various planes. Every time they needed to carry out interdimensional trade, the Micah Chamber of Commerce would come to the Wheel of Fortune to exchange coins. This was to prevent the embarrassing situation of holding the soul prism in Mountain Paradise or holding the rainbow stone in the bottomless abyss. "It's really wonderful," Keyes could not help but comment. After listening to Shemashaka's business model, he was in awe of the Underworld Queen's innovation in interdimensional finance. If the scales of Eternal Order wants to trade in many planes, they also need a financial center for exchange. Just as he was thinking, Shemashaka actually broke free from the influence of the Greater Directive because she had relaxed her power. However, her mind still existed in the state before she was coerced, and her voice was still a little frightened. "I have the resources you need. Believe me, we can make a lot of money together. And I promise you that you won't owe any money." Naturally, Quest didn't believe a single word of the female Yugolotha's guarantee. He did not really want to join the Mica Chamber of Commerce's purchasing system just to promote the potions of the Myriad Herb Hall. Besides, what he was thinking about now was how to develop his scales of eternal order. "In my impression, the liar Mica has died in the bottomless abyss. You just said that you recently returned from the scorched hell and have attended his memorial service." After thinking for a while, Keyes's face showed a warm smile again. "It seems that you are now the largest shareholder of the Mica Chamber of Commerce." "Yes. You don't believe me? Listen, I can understand the caution of a shadow thief master, but—" No, I believe what you said," the young blue dragon interrupted Shemashaka. "But I'm afraid that your cousin who died suddenly did not leave a clear will. That's why he didn't explain clearly that he still owes a large amount of debt to the outside world." Keyes suddenly had a large number of documents in his hand. They were the debt contracts signed by the liar Mica in New Boone Town. And the person who owed the debt, the young blue dragon Keyes, was not only the Lord of Bader in that city, but also the commander of the Bader Expeditionary Army in the Acid Fog Canyon Plain. According to the code of the 9 prisons of Bader and the additional conditions of the Hell contract, the contract they originally drafted would have additional modifications as Keyes's status rose. The debt that had basically been paid off had now increased by several digits. After the death of the liar Mica, Shemashaka, as the largest shareholder of the Mica Chamber of Commerce, naturally assumed this debt. And Keyes also found that the debtor column on the contracts he signed with Mica had been changed to Shemashaka's real name. For the creatures of the lower realm, real names were very restrictive. Especially in the Bader contract, if the Yugoloths wrote their real names, they were basically at the mercy of others. This characteristic was related to the origin of the Yugoloth. They were not native creatures of the scorching hell, but a species created by a deceased old hag lord under the arrangement of the Astamors to provide soldiers for the Bader Legion. In the beginning, all the Yugoloths in the neutral evil camp had their real names written in a taboo book called the Book of True Names, which was in the hands of the Astamors. However, due to some unknown things, some people speculated that it was the doing of the old Haglord, so the Lord of 9 Hells directly killed her in the paying the bill. The other lords who participated in the rebellion were also severely punished, but not as severely as her. The Book of True Names was damaged and stolen, and the Legion of Devils of Bader could no longer conscript the Yugoloths for free. From then on, the group of demons of the neutral evil camp began to wander between demons and devils, becoming mercenaries and merchants in the blood war. However, no matter what kind of service they provided to the creatures of the lower realm of the other 2 evil camps, the Yugoloths would never sign their real names on any contracts. Especially when dealing with demons, if they signed their real names on the Bartholomew contract, the Lord of 9 Hells would be the arbiter of the Hell contract. With the power of the Book of True Names in the arbiter's hands, the Lord of 9 Hells would be able to trace all the Yugoloths related to the fool who signed their real names. "You're really unlucky to have such a selfish cousin, but it's the opposite for me." Chapter 6:18. The dragon head warhammer hit Shamisha's head, but Keyes controlled his strength, so the female judge of Yugros was not smashed into meat paste. Although he had the idea of letting the Scale of Perpetual Order obtain the Wheel of Fortune Casino in Sigil City, it would take some time to arrange. At the same time, he also needed Shamisha's cooperation. This cooperation would definitely not be voluntary for the Underworld Queen, so Keyes did not have the idea of making her voluntary. If one wanted to control a neutral evil demon who controlled a lot of resources, the best way was to make her sign a hell contract with her real name. But considering the identity of the arbitrator of the hell contract, the Astamors, the young blue dragon had to be cautious. After all, he did not know if the Lord of Nine Hells would leave any backdoors in the completed Hell contract. Since the Lord of Nine Hells was behind the scenes, plotting all kinds of evil in the multiverse, Keyes felt that the possibility of the Lord of Nine Hells leaving a backdoor in the Hell contract was quite high. So, he decided to use a new method to make Shemisha, or rather, Shemisha's identity, obediently become his agent and serve him. After being hit by the Dragon Head Warhammer, Shemisha was about to return to the scorched hell to be reborn, although she was not smashed into pieces. However, the moment her soul emerged from her body, Keyes imprisoned it in a ball-shaped ruby. Her rapidly decomposing corpse naturally stopped decaying. Looking at the messy office, he noticed that Otto-chan, whose armor had just been broken, was showing signs of waking up. So, the young blue dragon walked over and pinched Otto-chan's neck, causing him to fall into a coma again. With that done, Quest took Shemashaka's corpse and left without a second's delay. Returning to the Thousand Herb Hall in the big market, Keyes greeted Pu Wu and went straight to his office on the top floor. He took out a variety of equipment from his spatial ring and completed the corresponding assembly work. Soon, something that looked like a cultivation pod appeared in his office. This was a device developed by Shay. It applied a large amount of bioengineering technology from the Wonder Craftsman race. It was specially used to cultivate androids, a kind of construct life form that was similar to a living creature in appearance, but was actually an extremely high-end level. Androids could have their own souls, unlike ordinary golems, which needed to be infused with the souls of elemental lifeforms. Android technology was originally a byproduct of the arcane craftsman's research. They were researching how to modify the flesh of the Reapers so that they could better integrate into the material plane to complete their mission. However, because they finally discovered that after the flesh and blood transformation, the Reapers might deviate from their alignment, the manufacturing technology related to robots was banned from large-scale application. However, out of respect for all kinds of technology, this technology was still recorded. The reason why Shay designed this training cabin was actually to apply robot manufacturing technology to the rapid treatment of seriously injured ordinary soldiers. It was just that in subsequent experiments, he found that using this kind of training cabin required a lot of resources. The total amount of resources consumed to use this training cabin to save the life of a soldier was even more than the total amount of resources needed to recruit and train a new soldier, so this invention lost the significance of large-scale promotion. However, this did not mean that the training cabin was completely meaningless. Because it could combine medical functions, this training cabin could create a robot that looked exactly like the original owner of the body sample in the presence of a partial body sample. For some of the lower world creatures with body and soul as one, if the robot used to create them could suppress the original soul, then the soul of the robot could replace the will of the original soul. Therefore, when he realized the importance of Shemashaka, and at the same time, he was worried about forcing it to sign a hell contract. Therefore, Quest made a prompt decision and decided to create a bionic Shemashaka that looked exactly like Shemashaka as his agent. Fortunately, before he came to Sigil City, he had brought along a set of cultivation equipment and enough resources to concoct 50 sets of cultivation fluid for him. Otherwise, it would be a bit difficult to create a Yugoloth judgment demon. From the moment he placed Shemashaka's corpse into the incubation chamber and closed the lid of the incubation chamber, it took about 6 hourglasses worth of continuous infusion of incubation fluid. Only then did the newborn underworld empress take shape. During the process of shaping her bionic limbs, Keyes put the ruby ball that imprisoned Shemashaka's soul in her brain. Out of caution, when the young blue dragon constructed the brain part, he deliberately replaced the material with the cells of the Leviathan creature to facilitate his control. After 10 hourglasses, the completed bionic Shemashaka climbed out of the training cabin. For people who didn't know the details, it was basically impossible to distinguish her from the original underworld queen from her appearance. However, under the right light, the characteristics of her bionic form would still be revealed by the metallic luster in her eyes. Her body was completely artificial, made of materials that imitated the flesh and bones of biological creatures, plus biological circuits densely covering the whole body. Her organs perfectly imitated the Yugoloth judgment demon. Only by examining the material and composition of these tissues, which used transparent oil and polymer alloys instead of blood or tissue fluid, could it be guessed that she was actually a creature created by others through some technology. She was like a baby that had just crawled out of a metal womb and had just cut off the electric umbilical cord. After familiarizing herself with her new body, the bionic left the infant stage. Whether it was the talent spells of the Yugoloth judgment demon or the racial abilities of the bionic, Shemashaka quickly mastered them all. Go and take over the Wheel of Fortune casino. No matter what the problem is, as long as I am in Sigil City, you can communicate with me through this device. Keys gave Shemashaka a radio transmitting and receiving device disguised as an earring. He gave his orders to the new Underworld Queen. Your task is very important, and no possibility of failure is allowed. As long as there are dissidents who have doubts about your identity, you have the right to deal with them. If you can't do it, contact me in time. Chapter 619. After clarifying the ownership and arranging the agent, the Wheel of Fortune Casino, as its name suggested, ushered in a brand new cycle of destiny. The android Shimshaka had the same means and temperament as the original female Yugros, but she had abandoned many flashy hobbies. It didn't take long for her to reorganize the network of forces under her command, providing more and better entry points for the future entry of the scale of perpetual order. At the same time, the Wheel of Fortune Casino, which used to be the financial hub of the entire Maikue Chamber of Commerce, also began to methodically counterattack on the large interdimensional trade organizations that it originally served. First of all, the android Shimshaka tampered with the exchange rate, reasonably prompting the Maikue Chamber of Commerce to reduce its scale of business in areas that might conflict with the scales of perpetual order. Then, she slightly raised the original acceptance rate, seemingly to line her own pockets, but in fact, it was a transfer of benefits for the scales of perpetual order. Finally, the Underworld Queen also began to meet with the various suppliers of the Maikue Chamber of Commerce in her own name, paving the way for the introduction of them to the scales of perpetual order. In addition to these adjustments in the commercial trade field, the android Shimshaka did the most for Keys was to provide all kinds of information. Whether it was the dynamics of the situation in the various planes or the movements of the various factions in Sigil City, nothing could escape Shimshaka's eyes and ears. And this was actually another basic business that the Underworld Queen had devoted herself to before the rise of the Maikue Chamber of Commerce. Now, it was convenient for Keys to continue to attack the gods and not the Gods Guild. That's right, Keys still had to continue to deal with that association. This was the only flaw in his otherwise perfect plan after he took over the surprise, super gift that was Shimshaka. Originally, he thought that with Shimshaka's intelligence network, he might be able to find out some information about the god of virtual games, STIM. However, the results of the feedback in the end greatly disappointed the young blue dragon. No matter how much the android Shimshaka inquired, there was no reply about the dwarf god. Therefore, after taking a detour, if they wanted to gather information about the gods, they would have to rely on the more professional and targeted approach of the gods rather than the Gods Association. This way, rather than having Shemashaka come into contact with the gods and non-gods, it would be better to take things slowly according to Key's original plan. This was because if she, who was known as the Queen of the Underworld and Intelligence Peddler, got involved, it was very likely that she would attract the attention of the association. This would not be beneficial to the young blue dragon's covert search for STIM. Of course, this did not mean that Shimisha would not be part of his plan. In fact, when he decided to inquire about the dwarf god from the gods, Keyes had already issued an order to the android. He wanted to use his influence in Sigil City to force the gods and non-gods to come into contact with him faster. Sometimes, rumors were more effective at spreading than accurate information, and the continuous process of fermenting might turn the rumors into reality. Therefore, when Shimshaka was selling information on a certain occasion, she accidentally revealed to a member of the Freedom Federation that the gods and non-gods had previously suffered a plague of rats and insects, as well as the invasion of the vine monsters, yellow musk creepers, viper vines, and mushroom men that they were currently facing, were actually due to the dissatisfaction of a certain powerful god in the realm of nature with their blasphemy. And everyone who had lived in Sigil City for a long time knew that the Freedom Federation was like a reaction vessel filled with chemicals. No matter how accurate the information was, once it entered the Freedom Federation, it would become countless rumors filled with the aura of freedom. In less than half a day, various versions of detailed information about how the gods and non-gods had angered the god had spread throughout Sigil City. This information was even transmitted to some material planes. Although Shimshaka did not name the god at first, the people of the Freedom Federation had imagined many names for a certain god in the realm of nature when they spread the news. For example, Obri Hai Bior, Rag, Les Ave Wood, Elona, Chantia, Sylvanus. These gods of the realm of nature, whether good, evil, or neutral, were all mentioned. There were even some unknown lesser gods, demigods, and fallen gods of the realm of nature that were also on the list. To be honest, the Freedom Federation's ability to spread news was admirable. In terms of spreading gossip, if they claimed to be second, then no one in the multiverse had the confidence, or the nerve, to claim to be first. Also, unlike the original version, which used words like enraged and dissatisfied to gloss over the situation, the news that was edited and fabricated by the Freedom Alliance exaggerated the blasphemous actions of the gods and not the gods' association to a whole new level. Rumors stopped at wise people, but those who were truly wise were the minority. Those who were ambitious and ignorant blind followers were the real majority. As the news about the gods and non-gods continued to spread, the entire Sigil City was gradually affected by this matter. Although the gods could not descend upon Sigil City, the various true gods still sent many priests to the city. Many priests who believed in the gods of the realm of nature began to link up, shouting slogans and holy names as they rushed to the broken temple. Not only that, when the news spread to some material planes, some fanatical believers were also bewitched. They came up with many ideas to come to Sigil City in an attempt to crusade against the gods and non-gods who dared to blaspheme the god. In just a few days, those who ran the portal business made a lot of money. Some people were even inspired by money and faith to maintain the portal for a long time so that more crusaders could descend upon Sigil City. Moreover, as the situation gradually escalated, not only the gods related to the realm of nature, but also the gods of the evil realms such as chance, trickery, battle, conspiracy, and so on, many priests and believers came. Their arrival stirred up the water in Sigil City even more. Therefore, when the first people raised their arms and shouted, a large number of priests and believers of the gods, regardless of whether the rumors were related to their gods or not, responded. They spontaneously gathered into an army and launched a frenzied attack on the broken temple in the lower city. After the plague of rats, insects, and herds of carnivorous plants, the gods and non-gods faced a new challenge. P.S. Below is not counted in the word count. Created a discussion group for Scales of Eternity, 618382262. Everyone is welcome to join in the discussion. Currently, there is an outline part of the comic format that I drew, an introduction to the Easter egg, related historical knowledge, and the author's daily life in the group. Readers who want to see more behind the scenes of the creation, please join in. Chapter 620. Barnes reached out with his skinny fingers and tapped on the marble desk in front of him. When a nervous and tall tiefling walked into Barnes' private office, Barnes turned his chair around so that he was facing the window instead of the door. He deliberately avoided meeting that tiefling's gaze. You request. This tiefling was the shapeshifter in disguise. He stuttered as he spoke, but Barnes raised his aged hand and stopped him from speaking. The shapeshifter broke out in a cold sweat as he stared at the back of his president's bald head. He looked at the other person in the office. This person was the vice president who had been in charge of the council meeting. However, this tall and strong tiefling only shrugged and didn't give him any answers or hints. "I'm not requesting," Barnes slowly corrected the shapeshifter. "I'm ordering you to deal with the rat and insect infestation." He turned his chair around. The nervous shapeshifter seemed really small as he continuously retreated towards the door. "You promised me so confidently, but this is the result." "President," the shapeshifter hurriedly spoke up before Barnes could continue questioning him. He then gathered his courage and boldly took a step forward, out of the shadows of the room. As a member of the Gods Association, although he was nominally the backbone of the Gods Agnosticism faction, the shapeshifter knew full well that everything he had was built on Barnes' support. His relationship with Barnes was like an employee to his employer, or a sheep to a shepherd. "Please believe in my loyalty. You're the president of the association, and I'm just your servant." "That's absolutely correct," Barnes shouted sharply. His voice sounded like a snake hissing in warning when it was angry. Standing to the side, the vice president looked suspiciously at his haggard appearance. This tiefling royalty was much older than him. Although there had been times when he had been angrier than the tiefling royalty, anyone who had ever interacted with him had definitely died to his golden lamp-burning staff. How could this shapeshifter possibly have the chance to express his loyalty by kneeling and licking Barnes' boots? "I'm the president of the gods, not the Society of Gods," Turns continued, emphasizing the last part of his title. "I designed and set the development charter and core philosophy of the association, but I also need someone to share this heavy responsibility. You said you were my loyal servant, but you didn't manage to complete the tasks I gave you unswervingly. I heard from the intelligence department that before you went to 10,000 Herbs Hall, you went to Baylor's Ash Nail. I don't believe that a materialistic person like you would go to an inferior bar in a lair to have fun. I was wrong. I shouldn't have hidden anything from you." The shapeshifter fell to the floor and replied with a sobbing tone, "It's all that eel-lined monster's fault and—" He originally wanted to mention the vice president who had made the decision to buy the medicine, but after considering that the other party was here, he quickly changed his words. "That damned 1000 Herb Hall. It was an unscrupulous shop. When I first purchased the rats, the black-hearted shop owner cheated me of a large sum of money. Before I went there for the second time, I just wanted to hire a thug from the raiders to teach the owner of the medicine shop a lesson. But who knew that I would meet Shimshaka herself in that bar? That cunning fox must have controlled my mind at that time. I hired Gyuj from her, but it didn't work at all. Instead, I lost half of my fortune in the shop of that mad goat kid." As if he was weeping and pouring out beans from a bamboo tube, the shape-shifting monster recounted everything that had happened to Tynes. The matter was related to his life, and he dared not hide anything now. After listening to his story, Turns fell into deep thought. The recent series of events had made him uneasy. Turns was already dissatisfied with the shapeshifter. Originally, he was going to personally deal with this incompetent and possibly traitor. When he learned that the shapeshifter had been in contact with Shimshaka, he immediately had this speculation. But the mad goat kid that the shapeshifter mentioned just now gave him a new perspective. There was no doubt that the mad goat was referring to Uli Thousand Grass Cup. This half-goat was the most favored preceptor of the Sensei Society in the past 100 years. There were even rumors that this crazy fellow might have a chance to become the head of the Sensei Society and obtain the same status as Turns. Originally, this elderly tiefling leader had already received news that Shamisa was the one who had spread the rumor that numerous divine members and believers were attacking the Temple of Light. She was the one who had told this rumor to a certain member of the Freedom Alliance. Turns did not doubt the actions of the Queen of the Underworld at all, because this was indeed her style of doing things. She would stir up trouble and see if she could profit from it. Although the big shots of the various associations hated the female Yugoloth to the core, they still needed Shimshaka to provide them with information and certain special resources in the future if they wanted to continue staying in Sigil City. Therefore, they had to maintain relative restraint and rarely engage in armed conflict with her. After all, they all knew that the female fox was a greedy person. As long as they gave her enough money and were generous enough, she would be easily bought over. But now, Turns had a feeling that the shop where the shape-shifting monster bought the potion was likely inextricably linked to the Sensei Society. Perhaps there was a huge organization behind it that could compete with the gods and non-god. Their goal was to trick the gods and non-gods, and this was only the beginning of a great conspiracy. "I'll give you one last chance," Turns said slowly after a moment of silence. Hearing this, the shape-shifting monster immediately put on a hopeful expression, as if she had been reborn after a disaster. "You still have to spend some money. This is also part of your punishment. You have to go to that potion shop again. Remember, this time, you have to buy a potion that can eliminate weeds. No matter how high the price is, you have to agree to it. But there's only one request. This time, they have to deliver the goods to your door. P.S. Words below will not count." Created a discussion group 4 Scales of Eternity 618382262. Everyone is welcome to join in the discussion. Currently, there is an outline part of my manga form, an introduction to Easter eggs, related historical knowledge, and the author's daily life in the group. Readers who want to see more behind-the-scenes footage of the creation should join in. Chapter 621. Delivery to the door? When Keys heard the words of the shape-shifting monster, he could not help but be slightly stunned. However, he immediately felt relieved. No problem. Providing quality service to customers has always been the purpose of Thousand Herb Hall. I will personally come to your door to prepare the herbicide. However, there will be an additional door-to-door service fee. Please settle it in advance. Although the shape-shifting monster was not surprised by this money-grubbing behavior, he still felt extremely annoyed. It was because before he came to Thousand Herb Hall, Turns had talked to him alone and made it clear that all the expenses of this operation would be borne by him alone. The gods and non-gods would not reimburse him even half a green coin. In fact, after paying the door-to-door service fee, the shape-shifting monster's pockets were already empty. All his belongings were mortgaged to become funds for the purchase of medicine at Thousand Herb Hall. "As long as you are obedient," he kept comforting himself in his heart. "It doesn't matter even if I buy you a street. After all, you won't be able to spend that money even if you have the life to earn it." Forget about what he was thinking. After receiving a total of 613 platinum coins, Keys only informed the half-goat Puwu before following the shape-shifting monster directly to the lower city. As the streets were not very peaceful recently, and the shape-shifting monster's pockets were cleaner than his face, they did not hire a sedan bearer and walked on foot. Walking on the road, Keys saw many crowds with banners and slogans. They were all volunteers who came to crusade against the gods and non-god. Among them, there were natives of the Sigil City, as well as fresh forces from other planes. It seems that the gods and non-gods are in a lot of trouble, Keys thought to himself. He originally wanted to say a few words to the shape-shifting monster, but since coming out of Thousand Herb Hall, the other party did not even have the slightest intention of talking to him. The shape-shifting monster only focused on leading the way for Keys. He avoided crowded streets and specifically chose some alleys to pass through and took shortcut. There was nothing out of the ordinary. One of the reasons was that the shortcut the shapeshifters took was indeed remote. At the same time, Quest also noticed that the places they passed through had been cleaned by professionals. The closer they were to the gods, the more alleys there were with such traces. It was obvious that the association's control over their own territory had not been weakened. After they entered the lower city, it did not take them long to reach the broken temple. There were already quite a few people gathered around this seemingly abandoned temple complex. Those guys were the followers and priests of some gods. Most of them were fighting for themselves and wanted to use their own methods to take down the peripheral forces of the broken temple. Other than that, there were also some people who were communicating with the rats, insects, and various carnivorous plants surrounding the temple, hoping to get some extra help. There were many gods of nature who were involved in insects, animals, and plants, and they themselves were in a state of competition. Therefore, the believers and priests of the gods were still in a mess when they tried to gain the trust of the insects and carnivorous plants. They spoke one after another, causing the insects and carnivorous plants to be confused, not knowing who to listen to. On the other hand, the ones who were communicating with the rats were mostly believers and priests wearing similar blue enamel armors. They were standing together with the group of rats that controlled all the rats, and seemed to be in deep communication with them. Those are the blind followers of the false god Les Yeux. Following Keys's gaze, the shape-shifting monster also noticed the group of guys in blue clothing. He was holding something that looked like a prayer wheel in his hand. As he shook his wrist gently, the prayer wheel was also constantly rotating. This was a magic item customized by the gods and non-gods. Once it was activated, it could make all the followers of the gods ignore the people and things around it. Les Yeux is from the Grey Eagle Plane, the shape-shifting monster said disdainfully. His followers are fools and poor worms who worship ugly creatures like rats and bats. It was indeed a specialized organization that went against the god. Even a guy like the shape-shifting monster, who had been immersed in the gods and non-gods for a long time, knew the secrets of the various gods like the back of his hand. On this point, even Quest was ashamed of his inferiority. If he had not told it himself, the young blue dragon would not have known who Les Yeux was, let alone know that this god had some relationship with the six-fingered in the bottomless abyss. Les Yeux is the race god of the Yeux race in the Grey Eagle Plane. As the first race god of the race, this false god is only a weak divine power. It's enough to show that this guy is a complete piece of trash. There's nothing to see about that race. The so-called Yeux race was actually a variant of the goblins. They were short and had blue skin. Most of them were distributed in the Grey Eagle Plains Bandit Kingdom, the old land of the Longhorn Society, the land of Bones, Pomagi, Wilberforce, and the eastern part of the Visby Forest. They had blue skin because most of them lived in the highlands and mountain peaks. In order to survive in an oxygen-deficient environment, they evolved hemocyanin composed of copper ions instead of iron ions. Les Yeux was the most powerful warlord of the race. He was once taken in and given power by the demon lord, Graz Zt. After serving Graz Zt as a slave master for centuries, Les Yeux did a reverse operation. He plundered the demon lord's arsenal in a material plane and claimed to have a territory in the bottomless abyss. Endowed by the demon lord with two foul war creatures, he could transform into a giant rat or bat in battle, but Les Yeux's natural form was that of a strong, ugly Eckwart, clad in blue armor and a tasteless but only luxurious-looking tunic. He carried a machete, the azure razor, but his favorite way of fighting was to throw various blades at the enemy and create acidic flames with his left hand. If this was not enough to prove that he was a coward, then he only dared to fight most of the weak non-human gods in the Grey Eagle Plane, but never made an enemy of demons and human gods. This was enough to prove that the gods and non-gods had studied his behavior and judged him. In his church, Les Yeux preached that Yeux was the successor of the world. They and their allies of rats, ratmen, and bats would destroy their enemies, especially purebred goblins and kobolds. Through cunning, numbers, and small alliances, you would overwhelm all opposition, just like Lesu himself, and fire and dagger were the tools you used against his enemies. Those who can turn into rats or bats have double blessings. In an almost aria voice, the shape-shifter told the secrets of the god of rats and bats, but the content was full of mockery and ridicule. Chapter 6:22. Leaning against his favorite big rock, Rufo slightly closed his eyes to adjust his thought. For an old man who was past his prime, exuberant energy was a luxury he no longer had. Perhaps it was because the surroundings were too noisy, so his wish to take a nap was not fulfilled. Thus, he opened his pair of dark gray eyes. The blasphemer's tower in the broken temple reflected in Rufo's eyes. It was the same as when he looked at the Lord's fortress on the mountain peak in the old town of the Longhorn Society as a child. His father always told him that the castle was too far away, and he always added that it was a good thing to be far away. As a member of the family of thieves, he understood the meaning of his father's words. But so what? Rufo whispered softly. Before he came of age, his father, who was his mentor, was caught by the sheriff and hanged in the town square. Rufo, on the other hand, was wanted. He had to use all his strength to shake off the dogs behind him and run to the mountain peak to avoid capture. It was there that he met his destiny. Young Rufo was captured by the blue-skinned Eckwarts, but just as he was about to be made into bacon for the winter, the great Les Ewart showed him a rare mercy. Rufo received a special honor that all Eckwarts envied. He became a god's chosen one with double blessings. He could transform into a cunning rat and an agile giant bat. Since then, he began to serve Les Ewart as a human. It had been more than 60 winters since then. The surface of his body was covered with indigo tattoos, which made him more agile and powerful. He led the Eckwarts down the mountain and occupied the old town of the Longhorn Society. Even the castle that he envied as a child became his private residence. Everything he had came from Les Ewart's charity, and he also wanted to use everything he had to repay the god's gift. So when he received news from an astral merchant who cooperated with him to sell the unspeakable things he obtained on this plane to other planes, that an organization called the Gods Not Gods Association had blasphemed the great Les Ewart, he ignored his stiff joints and packed his belongings to come to the city that others called the Gate. Rufo scratched his temples. He remembered the advice of the astral merchant. In the sigil, no matter what you want to do, the most important thing is to have your own way. Out of trust for an acquaintance, he began to look for a way. On the first day, he came to the sigil with an entire group of Eckwart's warrior monks. This old but still powerful warrior monk initially had similar thoughts to Keyes. He wanted to establish his own power and create his own way. But because he did not have the strength of the young blue dragon, he kept running into obstacles everywhere. He definitely could not afford to offend the large associations, and behind the small and medium-sized professional guilds, there were often legendary professionals. What made him even more uneasy was that since he came to the sigil, there seemed to be a layer of separation between him and the gods. He could not be like before, praying for the wisdom of the gods whenever he could not solve a problem. Helplessly, he could only accept the olive branch offered by the skullcap rat. Originally, according to the creed of the Church of Les Ewart, rats and bats were allies that could be relied on. They could be used for their own purposes and not be taught. It was always assumed that the ratmen, rats, or bats would listen to the command of Rufo, the leader of the warrior monks. But in the sigil, he and his warrior monks obviously did not have the influence of the skullcap rat. But the situation was beyond his control. In order to overturn the broken temple, he had to agree to listen to the command of the skullcap rat's collective consciousness. At the same time, he also realized that it was not only people from his church who came to crusade against the skullcap rats, the swarm of insects, and the carnivorous plants who wanted to snipe the super-large association in the lower city of the sigil. The skullcap rats were like stirring up a hornet's nest, attracting countless enemies in a short period of time. Rufo led his warrior monks and communicated with the skullcap rats while witnessing the gathering of the crowd in the square outside the broken temple. When the prince is trapped, his momentum is unstoppable. For some reason, a proverb that he heard when he was a child suddenly appeared in Rufo's mind, and suddenly, he was no longer sleepy. Even the chattering of Eckwert's subordinates, who were discussing the next course of action with the rat head's group consciousness, could not disturb the old warrior monk, who seemed to have been enlightened. In an instant, Rufo seemed to have understood something. He used his rough but nimble fingers to touch his blue enamel plate armor, and finally stopped on the blade of his fist at his waist. For the great Les Ewert! With a carp flip, Rufo suddenly bounced up. He did not care about the dirt on his trousers and buttocks as he let out a loud roar. Then, this warrior monk who had received double blessings began to transform. In a flash, a giant bat with a wingspan wider than an albatross and a body that looked blue as if it had been dipped in poison appeared above the head of the Eckwart warrior monks. After completing his transformation, Rufo opened his huge mouth full of fangs and let out a sound wave that ordinary people could not hear. But to the Eckwart people and the skullcap rats, this sound wave was no less than deafening and enlightening. It made their blood boil. Even the collective consciousness, which had always followed the path of seeking advantages and avoiding disadvantages, seemed to feel a long-lost surge of emotion. Originally, the skullcap rats were greedy for the incense oil in the broken temple. Provoked by the sound wave, this desire was like a prairie fire at this moment. Apart from them, there were also many priests of the nature realm who could understand the orc language. When these people saw Rufo use the orc language to shout the name of Les Ewert and proclaim the greatness of the god of mice and bats everywhere, their faces showed anger and shame. What are we doing? We have clearly declared war on the non-god association that blasphemed the glory of the god, but now we are afraid because we want to rope in the reinforcements here. Are we not going to use actions to punish the blasphemous organization without reinforcements? Are we going to fall behind the believers of the god of mice and bats and shame the great god? Absolutely not. This kind of thing is absolutely impossible, and absolutely will not be allowed. Rufo's actions seem to have detonated a series of chain mines. Anger, shame, self-blame, and other emotions instantly merged into an uncontrollable impulse. All the people, rats, insects, and even the carnivorous plants present stopped probing and attacking each other. For the first time, they all looked at the broken temple at the same time. Charge! In the name of the god! Chapter 6:23. The combination of suggestion and psionic connection trigger can actually exert a more powerful effect than mass charm monster. And since it's a single target spell, it's harder to detect than mass casting. Keyes thought to himself. After listening to the introduction of the shapeshifters, he became interested in the Eckwart monks in blue enamel armor. So, he tried to use spells and psionic powers at the same time on the leader of those guys. Originally, this was just an unintentional move by the young blue dragon. He speculated that at most, it could stimulate the old monk, but the result was surprisingly good. Under the effect of psionic connection trigger, Rufo actually used sound waves to control everyone. This kind of sound wave control was somewhat similar to the sound spell used by the desert elf. It also used the control of sound to frighten or stun others. However, in the process of casting the spell, Rufo involuntarily revealed psionic connection trigger, which made everyone present who had the basic conditions of empathy. They all wanted to deal with the gods and not the Church of Gods. At the same time, their spirits lifted at the same time. To describe it more vividly, Keyes used suggestion to program the content that he wanted to transmit. Psionic connection trigger was like a set of programming language that allowed Rufo to understand the meaning of the content. Finally, he used sound waves to control, which was when the program entered the final stage of execution. Originally, the gods and not the Church of Gods did not care much about those enemies. So much so that although they raised their alert level, they still did not withdraw their elite armed forces from other planes. But because of Rufo's shout, not only did it stir up the emotions of everyone present, but it also made them share a common hatred against the gods and not the Church of Gods. Those rats, insects, and carnivorous plants, which were originally natural enemies, actually temporarily gave up personal grudges for the sake of the big picture. They cooperated with the priests and believers of the gods, and together, they launched an attack on the defense line outside the broken temple. Looking at the frenzied fighting of those guys, although he knew that this situation would not last for too long, Keyes still had the illusion that he was back on the front line of a bloody battle. The struggle caused by the contradiction of ideals is always the cruelest. After thinking for a while, the young blue dragon turned his head to look at the shape-shifting monster, who had a surprised look on her face. "It seems that this place is not like what you said." He pretended to shrug his shoulders helplessly. "It's not an unobstructed place." At this time, the shapeshifters could only rub their temples in distress as they tried to recall where the other secret passages of the association were. The passage in front of them that led to the interior of the association was now completely occupied by the red-eyed cranes. It was impossible to pass through. Because of Rufo's encouragement, these rats became more impulsive, but they were still cunning enough. After determining that a forceful attack would cause too many casualties, they decisively chose to sneak in. On the surface, he continued to urge the ordinary rats to cooperate with other people, animals, and plants to violently attack the line of defense of the gods and not the gods' association. Secretly, these sly and swollen-headed rats relied on their instinct to dig tunnels and found many paths that looked like they could sneak into the temple. Still, out of caution, the cranes carried out many groupings. Dozens of cranes formed a group and broke away from the group consciousness of the rats. Although they were not as smart as the group consciousness, the groupings of cranes still had much more wisdom than ordinary animals. They formed small teams and burrowed into the tunnels that had been discovered by the rats, searching for all kinds of traps that might exist. As the small teams were killed by crossbow bolts, fireballs, hailstones, acid gas, and blades under the floor's secret door, the cranes quickly found a few safe paths. Unfortunately, the secret passage that the shapeshifters were going to lead Keyes into was also commandeered by the cranes. Left with no choice, the shapeshifters, who were already halfway through, pulled Keyes into a hiding place in the corner of the secret passage. They wanted to wait for the cranes to leave first before they went out. "This is a safe passage, very." The shapeshifters wanted to say secret, but changed their minds. "It's not easy to find. The damned cranes found this passage, but it's not that lucky. They can reach the inside of the broken temple quickly, much faster than the other dumb rat. The association guards inside are all battle-hardened elite. When they get serious, I believe they can quickly eliminate the damned cranes." Although the young blue dragon did not agree with the shapeshifter's explanation, he did not say much. This time, Keyes was invited to deliver the goods. He wanted to establish some connections with the gods and not the gods' association so that he could prepare for his next inquiry or purchase of information about STEM. His original plan was to first prove his value by demonstrating the effect of the herbicide, and then seek for information. But in that case, how the gods and not the gods' association would evaluate his value was still up for debate. However, the unintentional attempt just now had the effect of a catalyst. The gods and not the gods' association who were under siege would definitely feel the pressure. They would definitely increase the value of the potion supplier who could help them deal with the carnivorous plants, rats, and insects. This way, it would be convenient for Keyes to raise the price and get more detailed information about Stim. As for whether they would go back on their word, it was not within Keyes's consideration. That would lead the whole thing in another direction. Although the young blue dragon did not want to cause unnecessary trouble, he did not want to use force in Sigil City. But as his strength continued to grow, he would not tolerate those who dared to challenge his bottom line. I hope so. After listening to the shapeshifter's explanation, Keyes just said coldly, based on the current situation, if I want to launch a door-to-door service in the future, I will definitely charge more. After all, being blocked by a group of rats in an alley is definitely not a good experience. After listening to Keyes' ridicule, the shapeshifters did not say anything. He had just put all his attention on the situation outside the weapon hideout. He had just mimicked the appearance of a part of the Trier Beeman, and 2 tentacles grew out of the top of his head to sense vibrations. After placing the 2 tentacles on the wall of the weapon hideout, he felt that the rustling sound of the rats passing through had lessened a lot. We should be able to go. Chapter 624. When a god of nature or a powerful spirit needed a warrior to protect the animal world on his behalf, he would pour a part of his power into the body of a mortal, making him, her, or it the unity of animal and human. Generally speaking, every animal in the world only had one beast king to protect them at any one time. If the old beast king was lost or failed in their journey, the power that created the beast king would create a new beast king to challenge his derelict predecessor and kill him in battle. Only the winner could become the beast king or get the chance to redeem himself. Skaven was originally just an ordinary berserk rat, but by chance, he became a new beast king. In the challenge, he successfully killed the previous beast king and became the real rat king of a certain world. But what he wanted was even more than what the gods were willing to give. So he left that world and agreed to work for the gods instead of the gods. Due to the rat infestation caused by the Skaven rats, after returning to the Sigil City, Barnes summoned Skaven, who was fighting outside, back to the broken temple. Originally, the president wanted to use the ability of this Rat King to completely eliminate the threat of the rat infestation, even if he didn't want to take the rats for his own use. Unfortunately, Skaven was only the Rat King of his world. It was not a problem to command ordinary rats, but to command the Skaven rats that had a group ritual, he was a little powerless. But in the end, this Rat King that disappointed Barnes was not sent to the front line. Instead, he continued to stay in the broken temple and was temporarily in charge of a patrol team. His task was to pay attention to the Skaven rats' movements every day, and if the rat infestation problem escalated, he had to stand up and buy some time for the association to prepare a backup plan. In order to facilitate his work, in Skaven's eyes, this was actually a disguised surveillance. Barnes also arranged an assistant for him. That guy was a demon rebel. Although he didn't believe in the demigod Ollie-Man like the others of his kind, Skaven still didn't trust that guy. Ever since the Jinn race first appeared, they were evil gods that accompanied the Jinn, and demons were neutral evil beings created by the Jinn, and as long as he was close to him, he would instinctively be vigilant. Because that demon was a lion demon. Even if he became a beast king, Skaven still had an instinctive sense of disgust for felines that looked like cat. And the so-called lion demon, as the name suggested, looked like a lion that could walk upright. The lion demon was like a humanoid creature with fur, but on its neck was a lioness head, and its eyes shone with a black light. This kind of demon was born to be a terrifying tracker. Everything they did was to hunt. Relying on their powerful bodies, keen senses, and deadly intuition, they always liked to stalk the most arrogant mortals, and when the time was right, they would tear apart a powerful opponent. They were the embodiment of the savage nature of the wastelands, embodying the ruthlessness of the earth and beasts when dealing with mortals. In a sense, their existence was a warning to remind civilization how small and helpless they were in the face of the wilderness. In addition to these, the most unbearable thing for Skaven was the lion demon's almost endless questions. Due to his strong desire to hunt, he always asked the Rat King beside him about everything about the headcap rats so that he could know more about the prey he had anchored. When Skaven had no choice, he would always use yes, yes or yes, yes, yes to brush him off. These two sentences had even become the Rat King's catchphrase. Can those headcap rats burrow? Can they find the secret passage to the outside world from the broken temple? Yes, yes, it is very possible. Since the main threat of the head cover rats is the group consciousness, does it mean that as long as we kill enough rats, we can weaken or eliminate the ability of this group consciousness? Is it possible that there is a main Rat King among them? I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about the head cover rats. Yes, yes, but they don't have a Rat King. Skaven was patrolling with a squad of half-beastmen. Every time he thought about something related to the headcap rats, the lion demon would ask Skaven questions, which annoyed him immensely. Because the gods' believers and priests outside were currently attacking the temple, Skaven's patrol team didn't have any well-equipped tiefling warriors. Instead, there were only a few half-beastmen wearing haphazardly put-together armor to make up the numbers. Every time the half-beastman took a step forward, there would be a series of clanking noises. The lion demon's endless questions and the half-beastman's footsteps finally pushed Skaven to the limit of his patience. He suddenly stopped and looked at the half-beastman and half-beastman with a dangerous expression. But just as he was about to say, "I've had enough," the Rat King's sneaky round ears suddenly turned, and the hair on his back stood up. "There's a situation. The headcap rats are attacking," Skaven shouted in a sharp voice. Immediately afterwards, he quickly took off the Venom Fong blaster from his back. It was a lever-action rifle with a 1.5-yard long barrel and a 10-round magazine. At the muzzle of the Venom Fong rifle was a 2-foot-long sawtooth bayonet. When he took out his weapon and aimed at the exit of the secret passage, his aura became stern and tyrannical. At his reminder, all the half-beastmen raised their spears and crossbows and gathered around the secret passage in a crescent formation. The lion demon stretched out his sharp claws and climbed to the top of a half-collapsed stone pillar, closely staring at the exit of the secret passage. Whenever an enemy walked out of the secret passage, he would immediately jump down and launch a surprise attack. While everyone was staring at the exit of the secret passage, Skaven stuck his tail to the ground and felt the earth tremble. Suddenly, the King of Rats sensed some movement. He immediately turned the muzzle and aimed at a piece of rubble. Bang! 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 He pulled the trigger 3 times in a row, and 3 bullets shot out from the muzzle. "Be careful, they're splitting up." The explosive Venom Fong bullets were extremely powerful. Rubble, and dust flew everywhere. Skaven's nose twitched as he smelled blood. "That's right, there's a small group of headcap rats over there." He raised his head and shouted at the lion demon. "See if there are any other headcap rat. They know that we've discovered them, so they want to split up and sneak in." Chapter 625. With Skaven's reminder, the half-orcs in the patrol team might not have reacted, but the lion demon, who had a high IQ, quickly responded. This demon spirit relied on its superior tracking ability to immediately jump down from the stone pillar and landed in another pile of rock. He waved his claws so fast that they left afterimages. It was like playing a game of whack-a-mole. The lion demon wiped out the other group of head cover rats that dared to show up. The whole process only took a few breaths. And in the process of attacking, every time it tore, it would absorb a bit of the opponent's constitution. Feeling the power in its body gradually filling up, the demon spirit raised its head and excitedly roared. "We can't let our guard down." Hearing the roar, Skaven frowned. The head cover rats are not only this much. As the Rat King, He had a clear understanding of the abilities of the head cover rat. Destroying 2 groups was only killing more than 200 head cover rats, which was not even a fraction of the rat group. The enemy was not weakened at all. Sure enough, at the same time the lion demon roared excitedly, a huge fireball suddenly fell behind the demon spirit. Although they were all demons, demon spirits were after all a race created by a demigod through the distortion of a jinn. Compared to the devils, demons, and even the slightly weaker Yugoloths, their talents were slightly inferior. The most direct manifestation was that every demon spirit had a strange weakness, which forced them to act in a specific way. For example, the evil-eyed demon always attacked the most beautiful opponent, the ruin-word demon always liked to bargain to obtain secrets, the desire demon never wore red clothes and always stayed away from houses painted with red paint. Many wise spellcasters knew about these weaknesses of demon spirits and widely publicized them. Although demon spirits were also aware of their own OCD and tried to avoid falling into the traps of these people. But weaknesses were still weaknesses. If it was really so easy to overcome, then demon spirits would not just be a fringe race of the evil camp in the multiverse. The lion demon's weakness was that it was too arrogant and vengeful. In the middle of a battle, when they were in a hunting mode, they would always be the first to rush towards the strongest of the enemies. And if there wasn't a prey that was powerful enough to excite them, they would often not let go of the first enemy that counterattacked them. In short, even though the lion demon's spirit looked ferocious and battle-savvy, it didn't have the ability to see the bigger picture. Therefore, after being hit by a fireball, he continued to attack his opponent, a group of thousands of head cover rats, and started to fight, not caring about the other groups that popped up. Even when that subgroup appeared right beside him, he actually acted as if he didn't see them and didn't even bother to look at them. You're obviously an idiot in combat. Why are you pretending to be a little genius in hunting? Seeing the lion demon's crotch, the king of rats, Skaven, was fuming with anger. You chased me around for so long, but in the end, you didn't remember anything. But at this point, he couldn't care less about the lion demon spirit's crazy fighting style. For Skaven, the most important thing now was to suppress the head cover rat's group behavior. As long as the group ritual of the rat group was not completed, he would have completed the task assigned by President Barnes. After that, more guards would naturally rush over and completely eliminate the head cover rat. He was very clear that as an organization that could challenge the gods, the background of the gods was far beyond the imagination of many people, and even the gods. If it weren't for the elite forces of the Association now in the astral world and other planes, the head cover rats, earth monsters, carnivorous plants, and the believers and priests of the gods would not be able to do anything to the broken temple. After making up his mind, Skaven's finger pulled the trigger and never stopped. With his agile fingers, his tail that could help reload bullets, and the sufficient ammunition he carried with him, he shot the lever-action rifle like it was a submachine gun. And every few bullets there would be 1 or 2 enchanted bullets, which could always cause a lot of damage to the head cover rats that were ready to group up. After being scattered, the head cover rats in the group were no longer under the command of the group consciousness, so they were scared and ran around. Strong protective arrow. Just as Skaven was having a good time, the head cover rats finally had a preliminary group consciousness, and they decisively cast a protective spell on the head cover rats. In this way, the long-range attack of the Rat King would no longer have such a fierce effect, and the head cover rat's group speed suddenly increased. Seeing this, Skaven immediately called out to the half-orcs. As for the lion demon who was still playing hide-and-seek with another group, he was too lazy to pay attention to him. He ordered them to attack the reunited head cover rat. However, the head cover rats that had the group consciousness command and the head cover rats that didn't have the group consciousness command were 2 completely different concepts. The degree of danger of the 2 could not be compared at all. The rats on the head suddenly advanced and retreated according to the rules, and their attacks suddenly became methodical. After entering the group consciousness, the head cover rats formed a whole. They were no longer afraid of individual death, and they could always choose the path with the least sacrifice in exchange for the greatest damage to the enemy. Those half-orcs often only killed a few head cover rats, and the Achilles tendons on their feet would be torn by the sharp teeth of the other head cover rats, and then they would fall to the ground with a pop sound, and then they would be eaten by the head cover rats. As a last resort, Skaven began to try to use the Beast King's special skill to influence the head cover rats that were still not in a group and had not been controlled by the group consciousness. He kept driving the head cover rats that didn't have much intelligence, implanting them with the subconscious that this place was very dangerous, and making them run away from this place. However, Skaven was, after all, one person. The head cover rat's integration speed was much faster than the speed at which he notified them one by one. Often, before he could completely persuade the head cover rats to separate into groups, the head cover rats with the group consciousness had already pulled this part of the head cover rats into the spiritual network. P.S. The following words are not counted in the word count. I have established a Scales of Eternal Order discussion group 618-382262. Everyone is welcome to come in and discuss. So far, I have the outline part of the comic format I drew, the introduction of the Easter egg, related historical knowledge, and the author's daily life have been released one after another in the group. Readers who want to see more behind-the-scenes highlights of the creation, please join. Chapter 626. The Broken Temple. Although it didn't sound like a large area, it actually took up nearly half of the lower city district of Sigil City. Even compared to the size of the capital cities of certain material planes, the Broken Temple wasn't much smaller. However, apart from the central area of the Broken Temple, which was used by the gods and not the higher-ups of the theocracy, which had been repaired, most of the Broken Temple was still barren. The ground was filled with rubble and gravel, with no one taking care of it at all. About 1/6 of an hourglass had passed since the Rat King, Skaven, led his patrol team and started a fierce battle with the rats that had infiltrated the Broken Temple. The first batch of reinforcements finally arrived, and they almost let the rats escape. The shapeshifter and Keys, who had just passed through the tunnel, happened to be stuck in the tunnel by this battle. There were no more hiding places near the tunnel's exit. The shapeshifter had no choice but to change his form again. He transformed into a tiefling warlock and used the ability he had copied to change the seal on the tunnel. At the same time, he was still praying and hoping that the battle outside would end quickly. However, as a deity and not a member of the Gods Guild, the prayer he sent out was likely to cover nearly the entire lower city area of Sigil City, even though it did not sound like a large area. Even if it was compared to the size of the capital city of some material planes, the area it occupied would not be much smaller. However, apart from the central area of the Broken Temple, which was used by the gods and not the higher-ups of the theocracy, which had been repaired, most of the Broken Temple was still barren. The ground was filled with rubble and gravel, with no one taking care of it at all. About 1/6 of an hourglass had passed since the Rat King, Skaven, led his patrol team and started a fierce battle with the rats that had infiltrated the Broken Temple. The first batch of reinforcements finally arrived, and they almost let the rats escape. The shapeshifter and Keys, who had just passed through the tunnel, happened to be stuck in the tunnel by this battle. There were no more hiding places near the tunnel's exit. The shapeshifter had no choice but to change his form again. He transformed into a tiefling warlock and used the ability he had copied to change the seal on the tunnel. At the same time, he was still praying and hoping that the battle outside would end quickly. However, as a god and not a key member of the Gods Association, his prayers would probably be like a blind man lighting a lamp, a waste of wax, and there would be no response from the gods. As for Keys, He was watching the battle between the association of gods and the headless rats with great interest. As he watched, the young blue dragon did not forget to assess the strength of both sides. If it weren't for the fact that they were already inside the broken temple, he would have wanted to add more fuel to the fire. Their strength is still considered strong. Every warrior has a profession level. If we were to simply calculate the average combat power, they might be slightly better than my legion. With mystic eye and psionic vision, every movement of the two sides would be reflected in Quitha's mind in a timely manner. They just lack the discipline of the bot or legion. Their combat standards are alright, but their war capabilities are not worth mentioning at all. While Keyes was watching and commenting, the second reinforcements of the Gods Association arrived at the battlefield. Between the rubble and debris, a door that looked like a gate suddenly rose. It was shaped like a mechanism. 13 large logs with a diameter of 3 inches were placed upside down like a fence. It was abnormally sturdy. Then came the door made of guichuang wood. The door button was a brass ring, and there was a horizontal latch inside the door. As the door and the horizontal bars opened one by one, a fishy smell gushed out from the gate. Then, a snake-like monster with a distinct human face on its head crawled out of the door hole. Its body was covered with fine black scales like an eel. Its forked tongue stuck out from its mouth with fangs, constantly retracting and making disgusting hissing sounds. It was a dark naga that coveted luxury, wealth, and power. And like the shapeshifters, it was also a key member of the gods' agnosticism faction. However, compared to the former, it preferred to live in the broken temple. Every day, it nimbly moved through the ruins of the forgotten land, hunting for treasures and weak creatures that might become its servants. Only lies came out of its forked tongue. For opponents that could not be deceived, the dark naga would use its own poison and destructive spells to eliminate them. In addition to the dark naga, it also led a group of strange spider-like servants called plasma weavers. These strange creatures with round amber-like carapaces, 8 pairs of tentacle-like legs, and more than a dozen eyes, made all the rats feel uneasy for no reason as soon as they appeared. The group consciousness immediately interpreted the memories of the rats about the plasma weavers. They are predators. They have hunted rats before. Spiders can spit blood. Blood can paralyze. They can jump up and attack. Gulazag, they can communicate with each other. Through continuous tracing of memories, the group consciousness finally seemed to have figured out the source of the uneasiness. In the process of its formation, it had accepted some small groups of rat. Among them, an unlucky group of rats had been attacked by the plasma weavers and was almost wiped out. In the memory of the rats, according to the sound of the plasma weavers, they named them Gulazag. The Gulazags could digest almost anything except blood. After devouring flesh and blood creatures, the digestive system would process the bones, flesh, and other body tissues of the prey. At the same time, the blood would be filtered and stored in the huge sac on the back of the body. After the blood mixed with their sticky body fluids, a viscous glue-like substance would be produced. The Gulazag could use this substance as a weapon or spray it out in the shape of a net. After the glue-like substance dried, it would become as hard as steel and maintain a dark red resin-like form. After understanding the source of the uneasiness, the group consciousness felt a lot more at ease. Because as far as the current situation was concerned, the plasma weavers and the dark naga did not seem to bring much extra pressure to it. The reason why the rat pack was wiped out was firstly because they were ambushed, and secondly because the size of the rat pack limited their strength. Now that the rats had evolved the group consciousness, they were not on the same level as the rat. Dimensional lightning. P.S. below is not counted in the word count. I've created a discussion group for Scales of Eternity, 618382262. Everyone is welcome to join the discussion. So far, there is an outline, part, of the comic form, an introduction of the Easter egg, related historical knowledge, and the author's daily life in the group. Readers who want to see more behind-the-scenes highlights of the creation, please join. Chapter 6:27. The terrifying dark green lightning obeyed Skaven's command and flew out from his fingertips. Skaven's goal was very clear. He wanted to attack the group of rats in order to delay the time needed for the reinforcements to enter the combat state. This was Skaven's good intention, but what happened next surprised Skaven. The group of plasma weavers scattered around the dark Naga began to spit out mucus webs. However, they were not attacking the rats, but providing some protection for the former. When the dark red mucus came into contact with the air, it immediately turned into a dark red amber cover, blocking Skaven's dimensional lightning. Traitor! The Plasma Weaver's traitorous behavior made all the gods and non-members of the Gods Guild realize that the Dark Naga, as the backbone of the faction, had probably been bribed. Now he was serving the enemy of the association, and the Plasma Weavers he brought were not reinforcements at all. The Lion Demon, who was still unwilling to let go of the head cover rat, also woke up. He stared at the Dark Naga with his black round eyes and said, "The President is right. When the situation is chaotic, traitors will emerge on their own." The lion monster maintained his usual loud voice, so that not only the Dark Naga, but also the shapeshifters and keys sealed in the dark passage heard his words clearly. "Things are getting more and more troublesome," the shapeshifters, who leaned against the wall, muttered in a low voice. "It's already a headache to be stuck here, and now it's related to other things." The shapeshifters could not help but feel a little upset at the thought of being asked to write a report and conduct a loyalty test. "Hiss, Terrence's kitten," the Dark Naga replied after hearing the lion monster's words. "You don't know what you're talking about. I'm not like you. Since I've never offered my loyalty, how can I betray? Why can those old guys enjoy the luxurious palaces, while I can only live on the rubble? I just changed a good employer for myself, and at the same time, I'm just here to receive some guests under the orders of the new boss." No matter how righteous he sounded, betrayal was betrayal. In addition, the words, "Terrence's kitten," made the lion demon fly into a rage. The robust demon spirit immediately locked onto a new enemy and pounced on the Dark Naga. The moment he leaped up, the lion demon suddenly used the demon's innate high-level teleportation ability. He easily crossed the barrier of space and appeared behind the Dark Naga. He raised his sharp claws and slapped at the ugly head. Puff! The lion demon's claws slashed across the head, but there was no scene of flesh and blood splattering. Only a wisp of green smoke was emitted. It turned out that the Dark Naga had used Displacement Spell and Silent Phantom to swap her real body with the Summon Phantom when she was talking about that long speech just now. "Kill him!" Before his feet touched the ground, under the command of the Dark Naga, the Blood Weavers simultaneously spat out the viscous liquid that they had prepared beforehand. These dark red blood mixtures were like sharp swords as they pierced towards the demon spirits that were in midair. After being spat out from the mouthparts of the Blood Weavers, the mixture began to harden as soon as it came into contact with the air. Dust cloud fur. The lion demon suddenly shook his body, as if he was startled, and a large amount of dust emerged from his body. This was another of his innate abilities. Due to his coarse hair, the lion demon living in the Doomsday Wasteland could produce and collect a large amount of dust and sand. In battle, he could create a dust cloud that covered his whole body by shaking his body to provide cover for himself. In addition to obstructing the enemy's line of sight, this dust cloud could also block some piercing and slashing damage. Only blunt attacks could ignore the obstruction of the dust cloud and directly hurt the lion demon's body. Therefore, even if he was attacked like a crossbow, this demon spirit only suffered a little scratch and a little bit of injury, but he was not seriously injured. As for the paralyzing effect of the blood mixture, it did not have much effect on the demon spirit that was immune to poison. The lion demon shook his head, and the feeling of dizziness was cleared from his mind. Short worm, the lion demon roared angrily, you've successfully angered me. I'm going to skin you, pull out your tendons, and make you into a roasted snake. What the hell is going on? Skaven felt a headache coming on. The new reinforcements had turned into traitors, and his unreliable deputy had gotten into a fight with them. The only ones that he really needed to be careful of were the head cover rat. Right now, he only had himself and a few injured tiefling warriors. Originally, there were also a few orc patrol members, but they had all been killed by the head cover rat. The head cover rat king picked up his beloved poison fang rifle and fired while looking for cover. Although the head cover rats were not familiar with the dark nagas, their group awareness was still much smarter than the lion demons. After determining that the dark nagas were not a threat, the head cover rats immediately began to concentrate all their strength and continuously attack the encirclement set up by Skaven. Although the head cover rat king's spells were not high-level spells, due to the head cover rat king's ability to calculate, each spell would produce unexpected results. This made Skaven, who was facing off against the head cover rats, feel an increasing pressure. The head cover rat's group awareness is comparable to that of the most experienced spellcasters. I can't continue fighting with them. I have to run. Skaven's instinctive sense of danger saved his life. The moment Skaven felt all the hair on his body stand on end, he did not think of anything else. He immediately turned around and ran in the direction behind him at high speed. After running a dozen or so yards, the terrifying cannonballs completely covered the land he had been standing on. The shockwave caused by the explosion directly sent him flying. Fortunately, he was a bit further away from the impact point. Hell's roar! Keys, who was waiting in the dark tunnel, saw a familiar scene through the secret eye and mind vision. Artillery shells with flames flew from a distance with unstoppable power, covering the head cover rats and the dark nagas. According to Keys's judgment, at least 30 Hell's roars fired at the same time just now. Obviously, they planned to kill the traitor and the intruder in one fell swoop. At the same time, the lion demon and Skaven were obviously used as cannon fodder. This is really a cannon. Rats, Keys shook off the dirt on his shoulders and shrugged. As expected of the Batsu Devil's son, he knows the principle of art is Patrick's star. Chapter 628. The abandoned city of demon rats, the core of Les Avau's divine kingdom, was located in the depths of the mysterious withered swamp. The endless swamps, lakes, and weeds around it spread dozens of miles away from the city. Before it was transformed into a divine kingdom, the demiplane was originally covered with verdant plains. It was the meteor shower and rancid rainwater from Les Avaux that turned the demiplane into an endless, mushy swamp. In the deep passages of the swamp, barges the size of human villages in the material plane were full of festering slaves. Sometimes, the barges would form teams and use a large number of oars or ingenious water wheels to push them through the muddy water channels of the swamp. It was because of the huge barges and countless slaves that the abandoned city of demon rats could get a steady stream of supplies. The poor slaves were forced to collect meager food from the arable land in the swamp. In the vast reeds, overseers kept whipping them until they met their quota. The overseers would temporarily stop beating them and turn to look for the next target. Because of the swamp, it was almost impossible to go to the abandoned city of demon rats by land. Any slaves who could not meet their food quota would be abandoned in the smelly quagmire, waiting to be devoured by the swamp monsters. After collecting enough food, the fleet would gather the slaves and go to the inner part of the swamp, waiting for the signal to enter the port in the dark ruined city circle. As the lights became brighter and the sounds became noisier, a huge port built on countless bridges and passages, full of berths and docks, appeared in front of them. The rice and wheat that were as tall as hills from the ships would immediately be filled with huge rusty grinding wheels, crushed into powder for all the residents of the abandoned city of demon rats. The patrolling petitioner warriors would also take away the workers who were too tired or were thrown into the grinding wheels and crushed into powder food. The residents of this cruel city were roughly divided into 2 parts and 3 classes. The 2 parts were the petitioners and the mortals, and the 3 classes were, from high to low, the priests of Les Avaux, the large clans of Equart, Ratman, and Batman, and the ordinary Equart, Ratman, and Batman craftsmen. As for the slaves who were not even qualified to be food, they were pitiful people who had traded with other material planes, cheated, and plundered their way to the abandoned city of demon rats. Because Les Love belonged to the camp of chaos and evil, the rules which he himself laid down, though certainly not strictly so, were accomplished in cruelty and perversion. The residents of the demon rat wasteland, from birth to death, were most concerned about how to live peacefully in the present. What they looked forward to the most was to become a member of the petitioners after death. The conflicting emotions and hard life made the residents of the abandoned city of demon rats selfish, irritable, and belligerent. Even the slightest quarrel could lead to an armed brawl that engulfed an entire street. After insulting, biting, and stabbing each other, the petitioners who were responsible for maintaining the rules in the city would rush over and take away all the injured for recycling. As for the victorious or lucky survivors, they would lean against the door and smile as they gave their final greetings to the unlucky ones. When some people laughed, they would definitely be accompanied by others crying. Only on the day of sacred sacrifice, the abandoned city of demon rats would order everyone to keep smiling. The petitioner warriors would patrol every corner. As long as they found any resident who dared not to keep smiling, they would not hesitate to pierce their cheeks with a small knife and give them a cruel, laughing punishment. As a reward, all the residents who kept smiling all day would be rewarded with a bowl of dried dehydrated vegetables and a packet of fresh bacon. In the 350 years since the establishment of the abandoned city of demon rats, Les Love had enjoyed the joy brought to him on the day of sacred sacrifice for 349 years. As the priests prayed and experienced the heartfelt smiles of the believers and petitioners, the god of rats and bats sitting on the shadow throne could feel the power in his body rising continuously. Another perfect day of sacred sacrifice. The power has risen just right, ha ha. Les Love laughed wildly as he pulled out a flying knife. With a gentle flick of his wrist, the flying knife passed through the hall of the temple and flew directly to the sacrificial altar set up in the bestial square in the distance. With a poof, the flying knife sank into the heart of a swamp plesiosaurus. After this monster with a huge body fell to the ground, countless rats and bats appeared around the sacrificial altar. Compared to their peers, their teeth were undoubtedly much sharper as they were specially cultivated for sacrificial activities. It did not take long for the scales of the swamp dragon snake to be peeled off. These tiny creatures also began to devour the dragon snake's skin, blood, and internal organs. However, in the face of tons of muscle and meat, they resisted their gluttony and did not swallow it into their mouths. What was more surprising was that these rats and bats used their sharp teeth to tear the dragon snake's muscle and meat into strips. Then, they would stack the strips of meat together. Finally, the priests would climb up the altar, take away the neatly stacked strips of meat, dry them, and make them into bacon as gifts and distribute them to the residents of the abandoned city of demon rats. An occasional act of kindness. Just as Les Love began to enjoy the cheese as a tribute, an untimely voice suddenly sounded in the temple. "It seems that you, a blue-skinned rat, have learned something after following me for so many years." With the sound of leather boots stepping on the marble floor, a tall humanoid creature swaggered into the temple. Les Love, who had wanted to ask who dares to make such a racket, jumped to his feet when he saw the newcomer's face. His eyes began to show panic. The newcomer was none other than his former master and the creditor he had betrayed in the past, Graz Zt, who was known as the Prince of Darkness. Seeing the arrival of his old leader, the god of rats and bats could no longer keep calm. Although he was now in his own God's kingdom, he was still aware of his own capabilities. The terrible existence in front of him, although not a god like him, had the powerful strength and motive to kill a god. Graz ZT, don't come over. My razor is not to be trifled with, Les Love said in a threatening manner. This is my kingdom. As long as I call for help, all the petitioners and my believers will come to kill you, the devil. Chapter 6:29. Ha ha! In response to the threat of the god in front of him, Hexfinger laughed twice in response, appearing to be particularly fearless. If I wanted to kill you, you would have been dead long ago. Why would I have waited for 350 years? My general Les I would. Hearing the title sealed in his memory, the god of mice and bats frowned imperceptibly. Although he could not refute Hexfinger, he also knew the nature of this old leader and would not completely believe what he said. After all, Hexfinger was a demon lord. As if reading his thoughts, Graz ZT leisurely walked up to Les Elwood and seated himself in the god's high-backed chair. Don't worry, I'm not here to trouble you, at least not this time. A stone wine glass appeared in the dark prince's hand. It was filled with a red wine-like liquid, but in Les Iwood's perception, this glass of wine was filled with the chaotic power. Graz ZT raised the glass and took a sip, then said, As a general under my command, you robbed one of my demon munitions factories and relied on the resources inside to become a god. At first, I was a little angry. But when I think about it, a guy who has never been valued actually has such courage. It really makes me feel a little surprised. In that munitions factory, the most precious material was this chaotic power. I remember there should be about half a glass. Graz ZT raised the stone wine glass to Les Iwood as he spoke. The reason you now have a little bit of divine power in the realm of chaos, I guess it's because of this chaotic power. And I guess you must have been overjoyed at the time, thinking that you had stolen some treasure, so you quickly ran away. Les Iwood looked at the glass in Hexfinger's hand, greed flashed in his eyes, but he remained silent. But actually, you know what? For a guy at my level, this chaotic power can only be used as a snack at best, and it can't increase my strength too much. So I was just angry at the time, but not too distressed. And when I thought it through, I let you escape back to the Grey Eagle. Because I want to see how far you can go with that little bit of resources. Then what is your purpose in coming to me now? Unwilling to be led away by the other, Les Iwood said in a choked voice. Don't you understand? Or did your brain degenerate after you became a god and became a prisoner of divine authority? Graz ZT suddenly raised his voice. You think you stole it, but it's actually my investment. Are you here to collect interest? Graz ZT had a helpless look on his face as he shook his head. Only the ignorant ones would charge interest. You may be a rat god, but don't be short-sighted. I am the Dark Prince. What I want is a return on my investment. What do you want in return? As a scoundrel, of course you have to help me steal something. When Keys and the shapeshifters walked out of the dark tunnel, the battlefield had turned into a white land. There was smoke, craters, and broken corpses everywhere. The lion spirit's dust cloud fur had been blown away by the airwaves, giving off a burnt smell. Even so, Sui Xiong still held a forked head in his hand. The Rat King, Skaven, was lying in a crater. His back was covered with gravel and sand. His long tail was dangling beside him, showing no signs of movement. The blood weavers that looked like mutated spiders had all turned into blood cocoons. Only 1 or 2 blood cocoons remained. They had not been destroyed by the cannonballs. As for the rats that covered their heads, they had all been turned into cannon fodder by the Hellscream's concentrated fire. The highly intelligent group consciousness had also quietly gone offline and fled with the remaining rats. How cruel! Keys looked around and could not help but sigh. As expected of a creature with a devil's bloodline. How cruel to itself. Oh, it should be to others. We've solved a quarter of the problem with minimal losses. The shapeshifters did not respond to the Blue Dragon Boy's words. The skeleton of the shapeshifters was slightly hunched, as if they were bowing in a certain direction. Sui Xiong and the others did not stay in this white area for long before they heard the sound of footsteps. Several hundred halberd-wielding tiefling soldiers stepped over the gravel and rubble as they walked over. When the soldiers saw Keys and the shapeshifters, some of them went to watch over them. The rest of the soldiers went to look for the rats hiding in the corners or cut down the blood weaver's cocoons to eliminate any hidden dangers. When the shapeshifters saw two hooded figures approaching, he hurriedly shouted, "Vice Guild Leader, it's me. I've brought back the person that President Barnes wanted." The Vice Guild Leader of the Gods Association, a member of the ancient Tiefling Empire's royal family, heard the shapeshifters shout and immediately waved his hand. The shapeshifters immediately discovered that they were unable to make any sound under the effects of the silence spell. "Don't be so noisy. This is a battlefield." The elderly tiefling warlock walked up to Keys and the shapeshifters at an unhurried pace. The tiefling warlock wanted to say something, but he suddenly had a strange feeling that caused him to furrow his eyebrows. "Come out. Stop hiding." He, with a vicious laugh, a bat-shaped figure appeared out of thin air. Keys did not even need to look to recognize who this person was. This was the human monk named Rufo, the leader of the Equart monk order from the Temple of Ruins. The moment Rufo appeared, he raised his hands in front of him. His index fingers were pressed together, while his thumbs were pressed together. Sound cannon. Due to the hand seals Rufo made, his voice was amplified by several times. Not only that, the sound waves gathered together and shot out like a cannonball. The wave-like sound waves instantly reached the tiefling royalty and accurately struck him. Asterisk bang. Asterisk asterisk bang. Asterisk asterisk bang. Asterisk asterisk bang. Asterisk. However, Rufo's attack did not have any flashy effect. A shield suddenly appeared in front of the Vice Guild Leader of the Gods Association, blocking all the sound waves. After taking the last hit, the shield cracked on its own. Seeing that the Vice Guild Leader was being attacked, everyone except for the tiefling warriors that accompanied him rushed over. The shapeshifters that were respectfully standing next to Keys also had a different appearance from before. The shapeshifters actually took the initiative to transform into a mantis. They swung their serrated arms, which were their natural weapons, and viciously smashed the bat-like warrior monk Rufo. Perfect timing. Perfect timing. Chapter 630. Keys stood with his hands clasped behind his back, acting as if this had nothing to do with him as he watched this sudden commotion unfold. In less than an hourglass time, the Eckworth warrior monks were able to break through the seal of the gods and enter the inner area of the broken temple. Keys was rather surprised by this situation, which was why he wanted to see just how far they could go. That's right, Rufo wasn't alone. After the leader of the warrior monks attacked, more and more Eckworth warrior monks revealed themselves. The dark blue leather armor they wore had obviously been enchanted. Ripples of light flowed through them, causing them to become one with their surroundings. With Keys's experience, of course he could tell that there was something unusual about these warrior monks. Judging from their movements, their martial arts didn't seem to belong to any of the 6 martial monk sects. The Sonda sect, the Dark Shadow sect, the Four Symbols sect, the Drunken Fist sect, the Eternal Death sect, the Sun Soul sect, and the Sword Saint sect. However, it would be a bit of a stretch to say that their martial arts techniques were completely random. The Eckworth warriors seemed to be imitating the agile movements of rats and bats as they advanced and retreated. Judging from this, their martial arts techniques were actually similar to the Tiger Claw style of the Nine Sword. While Keys was still pondering this, the tiefling vice president of the Gods Not Gods Association spoke up and resolved his doubts. "Burn these scoundrels with fire. They lack resistance to fire." The Eckworth warriors originally didn't have any warrior monk. They were only instructed by the false god Les Avewood to steal some warrior monk manuals from the false gods Zanya and Ru Ogden's temples, as well as the Scarlet Brotherhood's stronghold. Only then did they learn some basic techniques. There are still many loopholes in such a messy cultivation system. As expected, the Gods Not Gods Association was the most professional organization when it came to grasping the secrets of the gods. The Tiefling Vice Guild leader clearly explained the methods of these Equart monks. After receiving the Tiefling Vice President's instructions, some Tiefling soldiers used the power in their bloodlines and unleashed burning hands on their enemies while their weapons were still clashing. They immediately achieved great results. Equart, who was burned by the flames, let out a blood-curdling scream. A large hole immediately appeared on his light blue leather armor, and the skin inside emitted a burnt smell. He was no longer agile, and was quickly struck by the long halberd. It didn't take long for that unlucky guy to be dismembered by several axes, becoming the first monk to fall. Seeing this situation, Rufo, who was the leader of the warrior monk group, quickly shouted, "Don't fight with them. Use the rat escape technique to sneak up on those intelligent half-breed infernal creatures with axes." Then, he dodged the serrated arm in front of him and gave the mutated monster a palm strike. Then, with a whoosh, he escaped into the shadows beside him. When he appeared again, his entire body had turned into a human-shaped ferocious rat with bulging muscles. He was scurrying back and forth in the open space as if he was flying. The Tiefling soldiers relied on their Inferno bloodline to activate some fire spells, but they were all useless against Rufo, who was moving extremely quickly and constantly dodging in a zigzag pattern. After all, even if Rufo had a weak point, he still needed to be able to hit it, and after transforming into a ferocious rat, not only did this elderly human monk's speed increase, his stamina also increased significantly. Even after running for half a day, Rufo showed no signs of slowing down due to exhaustion. The Tiefling's bloodline power was limited. After using a few magic spells, they were all rendered speechless. Rufo couldn't help but chuckle when he saw this. "May the great Les Ihau bless us. Let us first kill all these blasphemous bastards. Then we'll enter the core of this rotten land and teach them to fear the gods." Rufo was like a cannonball as he crashed into a Tiefling soldier from behind. Bang. The Tiefling soldier was sent flying. A fist-sized hole appeared on the Tiefling soldier's armor. The soldier's armor was badly mangled. Meanwhile, the human-shaped ferocious rat warrior monk was holding a slightly beating heart in his mouth and viciously chewing on it. Blood dripped down from his mouth and dyed his azure armor red. However, Rufo didn't seem to notice this at all. Rufo used the same trick as before as he constantly jumped up and down with his agility. As long as he found a suitable opportunity, he would use the heart-gouging charge technique again. Although Rufo's Equart subordinates were unable to transform into human-shaped ferocious rats, they used a similar technique to Rufo's. They didn't engage in close combat with the Tiefling soldiers. Instead, they moved around the Tiefling soldiers like dragonflies skimming the surface of the water. Seeking help in the midst of chaos, the Equart monks flew around like butterflies. Even though this area wasn't very large, they still didn't collide with each other. Keys immediately realized something. This isn't a monk's technique. It seems that they did indeed find some information about the 9 swords and specifically practiced the White Raven sword formation. As the battle became more and more intense, some of the Equart monks broke through the Tiefling soldiers' defensive perimeter and attempted to attack the gods and vice presidents of the Gods Association standing in the back. There were also some monks who wanted to take advantage of the weak, and pounced on the young blue dragon who had been watching the battle from the sidelines. In order to maintain his image and not make a fool of himself, Keys had no choice but to use a method that he wasn't very familiar with. Glancing at the blue-skinned Equart warrior monk who was thrusting a dagger at him in an attempt to launch a kidney strike at him, Quest used his feet as an axis and quickly twisted his body to avoid the incoming dagger. Then, two weapons appeared in his hands. The howler that he hadn't used in a long time, and a watering can. Puff. The moment they passed each other, a highly irritating gas shot out from the watering can. The Eckwart monk, who was moving at high speed, was caught off guard and inhaled a large mouthful of the gas. Tears and snot flowed out of his nose uncontrollably. The monk's body instinctively contracted its muscles due to stress, creating an effect similar to a break. After spraying the devil pepper solvent, Keyes raised the howler double-barreled gun in his other hand. At such a close distance, there was no need to worry about aiming. He raised his gun and pulled the trigger. Bang. The Eckwart monk's head disappeared from his neck. What replaced it was a red and white stain. Chapter 631. The sound of gunfire attracted everyone's attention. Even the leader of the Eckwart order, Rufo, looked through the crowd to see the young blue dragon surrounded by smoke. Facing the muzzle, Quest made a gesture of blowing out a candle. He rubbed his hair with the muzzle and greeted the old monk, who looked like a ferocious rat. "You're the owner of 10,000 Herb Hall?" Sui Xiong's beautiful close-range gunfire also attracted the attention of the vice president of the Gods Association. This member of the Tiefling Empire's royal family walked over and asked Sui Xiong this question. "That's right, but I'm not the owner. I'm only a partner in that potion store. I'm using money and technology to invest." Keyes intentionally emphasized the word technology as he answered. In order to make his words sound more convincing, Sui Xiong even raised the double-barreled gun in his hand. Arrogant, impatient, and arrogant. The vice president glanced at Keyes as he made his judgment. Yep, any nouveau riche with a bit of skill would have such a problem. Right after that, the tiefling lifted his hood, revealing his thin face as he looked at Keyes. "Your potions are amazingly effective, but they also have many side effects." "Hey, mister." The young blue dragon intentionally pretended to be surprised. "I reminded that fellow twice already." He used his chin to point at the shape-shifting monster who had transformed into a mantis. "Every potion has a side effect. Make sure to control the dosage before using it." Lissa. "I'd rather you call me that instead of Mr., the tiefling said in a serious tone. However, Keyes could understand Inferno's language. He knew that Lissa actually meant Master Lissa. This old man was quite evil to even try to take advantage of Sui Xiong's words. "Mr. Lissa, I'm here to deliver your potions. If you have any additional requests, I'll have to charge you an additional fee." Flames flashed in the vice president's eyes. "You're no ordinary merchant. That's no ordinary word in Inferno's language. Only the Academy in Nessus teaches advanced grammar." It turned out that the vice president had been testing Sui Xiong. Ever since he obtained the study notes from the Devil Count Kanini, Keyes had been flipping through them frequently, so much so that his proficiency in the infernal language had improved by leaps and bounds without him even realizing it. However, Sui Xiong still replied unhurriedly, ordinary merchants wouldn't be able to create such miraculous potions. As for advanced Inferno's language? I'm sorry, but I've been traveling for a long time. Of course, Sui Xiong. Tiefling Risha didn't get angry at being rebuffed. Instead, he continued speaking in a calm tone. "All right then, have you prepared our secondary herbicide? In other words, the goods that we asked you to deliver to our doorstep." Of Sui Xiong Xiong. Sui Xiong Xiong. Xiong Xiong Xiong. Buys. Although Keyes was being threatened, he didn't seem to care. Sui Xiong kicked the bag next to him. "This time, I'm a true professional. I'm sure you'll be satisfied with the results. You might even be pleasantly surprised." Reza continued to talk to Keyes. He waved his hand and summoned two tiefling guards. "Take him and his goods to the Hall of Truth. President Theon would like to personally talk to this partner of Sui Xiong's." Also, tell the president that there's a gap in the outer defensive line. However, I'll personally take some people to fill in this gap." Upon receiving the order, one of the two tiefling guards bent down and picked up the sack by Cartha's feet, while the other took out a spoon from the armor in front of his chest and blew into it twice. Right after he blew on the whistle, 4 or 5 clay golems appeared from the ground. They carried all the injured soldiers on their shoulders and followed the tiefling guards into the shattered temple. Keys didn't say anything along the way. He was happy to be free. Sui Xiong calculated the time. It took him nearly 5 hourglasses to get out of the 1,000 herb hall and the shape-shifting monsters. Finally, he entered the core area of the shattered temple. Now, he didn't know how much time and effort he would have to spend to obtain information about Stim's whereabouts from President Theon. As expected, gathering information is more patient than commanding a battle, the young blue dragon thought to himself as he walked. The deeper they went into the shattered temple, the more Keys noticed that the patrols were getting denser. When they arrived at a building group that was about the size of 2 or 3 medium-sized residential areas, Sui Xiong saw defensive towers and sentry posts that stretched for dozens of miles. Even the young blue dragon, who had seen great battles, had to admit that this Gods Association is really rich. Not to mention the projects he supervised in the Ash World and the Island World, just the materials used in the construction alone, not including the mice energy core and other external equipment, the total cost of this building group was estimated to be dozens of times more expensive than his traction, floating city. After all, when building the mobile fortress, Keys had considered the practicality of the building more. The more expensive construction materials were mostly rare metals, but most of them were used to make precision parts. At that time, he couldn't have been as rich as the Gods Association in front of him. They used star stones as the light source for the exterior of the fortress, used thorium as the lines to draw lifelike blasphemous murals, and used polished diamond powder as the anti-slip belt on the palace steps. But he didn't know that the Gods Association didn't spend too much money to build this fortress-like palace called the Place of Truth Seeker. Those priceless construction materials were all second-hand resources, mined from the shattered temple. For unknown reasons, the Lady of Pain isolated the divine power in the Sigil City and destroyed the original temple area. The Gods Association took advantage of that opportunity and completely occupied the area of the shattered temple. Ordinary people didn't dare to deal with it. Even in the Sigil City, most of the mortals still maintained a basic level of respect for the god. The Gods Association didn't have any psychological barriers when dealing with the idols, sculptures, and collections in the temple warehouses. They smashed the idols, melted the altars, and sold the treasures hoarded in the temples. They carried out deeper and more thorough destruction of the temples for the Lady of Pain, and then used the second-hand resources collected from about 2,300 temples to build their own, the Place of Truth Seeker. From this point of view, there was nothing wrong with the actions of the priests and believers who wanted to crusade against the Gods Association. After all, the fact that the Gods Association was entrenched in the shattered temple itself was blasphemy against all the gods. Chapter 632. I want the lamp scepter, said Graziti seriously, looking Leziti in the eye. There was no one left in the hall of the temple. Even the Greyclaw prophet, who was the favorite of the god of mice and bats, was not qualified to stay here and serve their true god. After stating the purpose of his trip, the Dark Prince did not say anything else. He trusted in the power of Les Ewart as a god to ascertain the meaning of the words. With 2 pairs of ram horns on his head and a pair of giant bat wings on his back, Les Avewood, who was 4 to 5 times the size of Eckwart, stood in place with his eyes slightly closed. A moment later, his eyes widened. That thing is currently owned by the president of the Deities Association. Their president turns is currently in Sigil City. Clap, clap, clap. 6 clapped his hands to show his encouragement. Faster than I thought. He raised his eyebrows, revealing a teasing expression, but his voice was very steady. After becoming a god, you have indeed become much more alert. Sigil City is a forbidden zone for the gods. The Lady of Pain can isolate divine power, and she has the power to cross planes and kill the main body of at least a mid-level god. I can't agree. Before he could finish his words, an 8-foot-long heavy horse-killing sword appeared above his head out of thin air. Acid dripped from the tip of the sword onto Les Avewood's true body, producing sizzling sounds as it corroded shallow pits. That's right, this was Graz Zt's beloved acid explosion heavy sword. If the Dark Prince held it in his hands, this demonic weapon, which was equivalent to a mid-level divine artifact, would have the power to kill a weak divine force god with a single strike. Although Les Avet was a lesser god, it was just a matter of Graz Zt putting in more effort and slashing a few more times. After all, in the face of an absolute difference in strength, resisting would only be a faster path to death. However, he didn't know that only the Dark Prince's true body or a few of his most powerful incarnations could complete the task. With just this ordinary incarnation in front of him, this demon lord couldn't defeat a true god like him. But the best part was that Grazite's avatar had just drunk a drink that contained chaotic origin force. The chaotic origin force that rose from his body obstructed Les Avewood's probing and prevented Les Avewood from realizing that the avatar before him was just for show. I think I made it very clear just now that this is my request, and not me asking for your opinion. Graz Zt waved his hand, and the acid explosion sword flew back to his hand obediently. He glanced at the god of mice and bats who was trembling in fear. The threat in the fiend overlord's eyes was self-evident. Even if I agree to your request now, Sigil City is not a place that a weak divine power like me can reach. You must be very clear that gods are unable to manifest their divinity in Sigil City. And in that city, I don't have the power to. No, you do. Graz Zt interrupted Les Avewood's explanation with a straight face. I just praised you. Why are you being silly again? Could it be that after becoming the rat god, there would be a negative effect of being short-sighted? I know that you have a group of Eckwart monks under you, and they are now operating in the Broken Temple in Sigil City. Les Avewood was annoyed by Six-Fingered's rebuke. He was a god, after all. Fortunately, there were no believers or petitioners in the hall. But when he thought about it carefully, he was secretly shocked. A god's understanding of his followers, who were both fanatics and armed forces, was actually less than a demon lord who had lived in the abyss for a long time. And it seemed that Graz Zt already knew the cause and effect of all this. The Dark Prince was like a chess player, and Les Avewood, a god, was just a nameless pawn on the chessboard. At that thought, Les Avewood's "how do you know" suddenly turned into "what do you want me to do?" Six-Fingered laughed heartily at his former subordinate's question. A small part of his previous arrangement had now fallen into the right hub. Don't worry. You won't be killed by the Lady of Pain. I promise. Graz Zt, who knew Les Avewood's character very well, did not voice his thoughts first. Instead, he gave Les Avewood a reassurance. After establishing an appropriate psychological expectation, the Demon Lord then revealed his plan. I know that your power can't directly extend to Sigil City, but I have a channel to help you. Do you remember 3 for All Things? He has his own connections in the Lairs Great Morgue. Through the portal there, you can bring something to your precious group of monks. I remember the human kid who led them. His name is Rufo. He seems to be just a little bit away from legendary. And then? Les Avewood asked in confusion. Just to improve Rufo's power and let him ascend to legendary, can he steal what you want from Fiends, who is not a god's association? Graz Zt pursed his lips. Les Avewood did not avoid the word steal when discussing matters, which lowered his overall evaluation of the god of mice and bats by a few points. I have other plans, and you are only one of the 3 plans, but I still have to remind you that this part of your burden is not light. Les Avewood did not refute or question Les Avewood, just like when he was still a general under the Demon Lord, quietly listened to Six-Fingered's mocking instructions. He just grabbed some benefits for himself in the end. Just now, you promised that I would not be hated and hunted by the Lady of Pain because of your plan, nor would I die because of it. At the same time, the return on investment you mentioned before, can this service be completely offset, and you and I will have nothing to do with each other in the future? I only promised you one thing, but you asked for 3. Graz ZT thought for a moment and then replied with a smile. You learn quickly and are very smart. However, the merciful Prince of Darkness will still agree to your request. We can sign a real contract to bind each other according to the 3 requirements you just mentioned. As he finished speaking, a piece of black parchment appeared in the hands of the Demon Lord's incarnation. The moment he took out the contract, Les Avewood knew what it represented. It was a contract of the Nether River. Chapter 633. Quest stepped on the obsidian stairs and took approximately 330 steps. He followed behind the 2 tiefling guards the entire time. Finally, he arrived at the high platform where he could see the truth. By looking down on others, you can see everything and ultimately obtain the truth. Before stepping over the stone threshold, Keys saw a line of small words carved into the lintel of the door. Such a high and mighty tone. You don't acknowledge the gods because you want to worship yourselves as gods. The young blue dragon sighed in his heart, but he didn't stop walking. He directly stepped through the door of the Hall of Truth. Due to the abundance of materials and manpower, this building was built to imitate the royal palace of the ancient Tiefling Empire. In the center of the spacious hall, there was a translucent dome made entirely out of amber and gold. This allowed for better natural lighting. 13 towering stone pillars supported the ceiling of the hall. They were all repaired in a square shape, and each side was engraved with fragments of writings left behind by the philosophers of the Tiefling Empire. The words were all filled with gold. It was a classic example of a person who cherished words as if they were gold. The teacher and I entered the secret passage and returned to the radiant world. Then, not wanting to take any rest, we ascended, with him in front and me behind, until I discerned from the round hole that the heavens were laden with beautiful things. We came out of it and saw the multitude of stars. Dante's Divine Comedy, Inferno. Reading the inscriptions on one of the pillars, since Inferno was written from bottom to top, Quasmo's gaze gradually moved upward until he saw the stars, embellished with emeralds and rubies, as well as the fiery clouds that rolled up in the sky. This is Avernus. Just as the young blue dragon was thinking about the plain of Bottor, the sound of footsteps came from the side hall. Dozens of black-robed gods, who weren't the core members of the Gods Association, escorted a tall and thin tiefling elder as they walked towards Sui Xiong. "Are you the partner of the 10,000 Herbs Hall?" His voice reached Quest's ears before he even arrived. Turn's words were neither too fast nor too slow. At the same time, Sui Xiong could tell that some special magic was cast on this hall. Otherwise, with the elder's strength, he wouldn't have been able to speak so loudly. "That's me. I'm here to deliver the goods. Where's the herbicide we need? Now you should fully demonstrate the effects of your product. You shouldn't leave behind some side effects that force us to buy new ones. Perhaps that's your sales model?" Thun spoke like an old man. However, Keys knew that this was all a facade. Thuns was using the deceit characteristic of the Tiefling bloodline in order to mislead Keys. Sui Xiong and Sui Xiong noticed that several blackrobes. These blackrobes were stains formed from blood and dust. They had just returned at the temple, and had just Sui Xiong had. And Sui Xiong had no time, And Sui Xiong. Sui Xiong at. Faced with the attack of several forces, the gods and non-gods were indeed very busy for a while. Left with no choice, Thuns had to personally lead the core members of the association to launch a counterattack against the attackers. This stopped the frenzied attacks of the attackers. He had the intention to recall the troops that were fighting outside. Since you're in such a hurry, Keys did not hide the fact that he had seen through Thuns's tricks. He said in a mocking tone, "Let me show you how a professional should use the potion properly." Sui Xiong took out a watering can from the bag at his feet. "There's a scale on this. One small square of the potion is enough to deal with a group of sporemen. 2 small squares of the potion can be used to eliminate a cluster of killer vines," and, before he could finish his sentence, Burns vaguely waved his hand behind his back. A tall and skinny desolate devil skeleton took off his robe and took out a pile of sporeman dolls that had been drained of water using a secret technique. As the desolate demon snapped his fingers, the small plant humans that grew on the bodies of the creatures killed by the red-brown mold regained their vitality. The desolate demon threw them in front of the young blue dragon. Words are no proof. I've seen it with my own eyes. As they were beaten up right after they were revived, the squirrel-sized sporemen were enraged. They used a primitive and rhythmic stomping as a language to communicate with each other. Then, they immediately came to an agreement and rushed toward Keys, who was closest to them. The young blue dragon suffered an unexpected calamity. However, in the spirit of "the customer is God," Keys did not argue with the desolate demon. He only tapped his feet on the ground and lightly kicked the sporemen away. At the same time, he aimed at them and pulled the trigger on the spray bottle. The light brown, pungent medicine instantly enveloped the sporemen, but they did not seem to be harmed. "It still needs some time. The medicine is taking effect now," Keys patiently explained to Thens and the others. In fact, they did not have to wait for too long. In just a few breaths' time, it was also related to the recent invasion of the Broken Temple by some creatures. A few wine brew bees the size of a human fist flew in from the entrance of the hall with a slight buzzing sound. The wine brew bees directly pounced on the sporemen. They could smell the unique smell of the medicine on the sporemen from afar. This smell contained some information that constantly reminded the wine brew bees that the sporemen were the most suitable food for the larvae in the nest. They rushed in front of the sporemen, flapped their wings, stuck up their butts, and sprayed a thick secretion at the small vegetative people. This secretion contained concentrated alcohol. When it came into contact with the sporemen's bodies, it killed the red-brown mold in their bodies. When all the sporemen fell to the ground as if they were drunk, the wine brew bees immediately flew over to pick them up and quickly left. From the beginning to the end, it only took a few moments for a dozen sporemen to be wiped out. Only some remnants of the secretion of the wine brew bees were left on the ground. As the alcohol in the secretion evaporated, even the last traces quickly disappeared without a trace. A professional doing a professional thing. Ignoring the dosage and talking about the side effects is purely unprofessional. Keys put on a confident expression and calmly said to Therns and the black-robed people behind him. Chapter 634. Although Keys didn't win everyone's applause, he still managed to deal with the spore people in a clean and efficient manner. This caused Keys to notice the glint in the eyes of the God's Guild master. It was obvious that Barnes was greatly interested in the potions that Sui Xiong brought. Therefore, he was naturally treated very well and was invited to the banquet hall to have a meal with Barnes and the others. Theoretically speaking, it was possible to buy all sorts of ingredients in Sigil City. However, the food in the House of Truth was currently cooked according to Barnes' taste. Most of the dishes on the table were delicacies that tieflings liked. This also suited Keys' taste. The menu included fried battleship crab pincers and goby fish rice that tiefling royalty liked, as well as exotic Tuscan bread salad and salami bacon slices. The chef delicately presented figs from Scarlo and olive oil from Piceno as appetizers, while the main course was classic pasta and turbot. There was also amber-like Hanische grape wine that could be drunk without limit. We're currently in a state of war, so I'm unable to properly entertain you. Please forgive me, Barnes said politely to Keyes as he raised his wine glass and drank a glass of Hanische grape wine. The young blue dragon used a napkin to wipe his hands that had gotten dirty from eating the crab pincers. He then returned the toast to the old tiefling. You're too polite. After all, we're in a critical situation right now, and we can't rush to eat from the rear. At first glance, ordinary people would think that this was a banquet where both the host and the guest were enjoying themselves. However, in reality, the Gods Guild's top chefs had added a seasoning called rosemary truth to all the dishes on the table. Apart from being used as a seasoning, this herb was also one of the most important ingredients for the powerful truth-telling serum. Are you a member of the Sensei Association? Barnes asked in a seemingly casual manner as he waited for Sui Xiong's answer. Keyes shook his head. I'm new to Sigil City, but my partner seems to be a member of that association as well. Then what's your goal for contacting our association? It can't be that you're only interested in making money, right? Following Barnes' words, all of the association's backbones turned their gazes toward Keyes. Some of them had already stood up. Of course not. The young blue dragon turned a deaf ear to the unusual situation around him, and continued to wrestle with the huge battleship slicing crab in front of him while replying absent-mindedly, I want to obtain secret information about a certain god from your association. Why do you want to find information about that false god? What is his name? What kind of realm does he control? He is the god of virtual games. His name is Stim, and I'm looking for him because he still owes me a sum of money. After arranging for Keyes to go to a special room to concoct the herbicide potion, Tynes led the core members of the association back to the conference hall. As for the information they had just received from the young blue dragon, they still had to go through a final discussion before deciding how to deal with it. He's not a spy from another association, and the possibility of other forces adding fuel to the fire behind him is almost zero. A core member of the Mind Flayer faction belonging to the Gods Agnosticism faction was the first to speak. Tynes had previously instructed him to use his psionic powers in conjunction with Rosemary Truth to conduct a double test on the young blue dragon. Other than that, there were also a few spellcasters who were adept at divination spells who gave similar answers. It seems that the partner of the Thousand Herb Hall does indeed have a grudge against the false god, and that's why he contacted the association. After listening to everyone's report, Tynes made his final assessment. The current situation is very unfavorable for the association, and many of those who blindly follow the false god have launched an attack on the broken temple. Moreover, they have the cooperation of the three calamities, and the association's defense line is in imminent danger. Moreover, Shemashaka seems to be adding fuel to the fire behind all this, and that Yugro's judgment demon is also coveting the association's position. After thinking for a moment, Tynes spoke to everyone. I would like to work with him for the time being. He looked around and continued with certainty. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, and that shop owner Keyes. Although he's a little overconfident and wants to challenge a false god single-handedly, we gods and not the association should encourage such spirit. Gather all information about the god of virtual games and divide it into 3 portions. Every time that Keyes solves a problem, rat plague, insect plague, food plant plague, we'll give him a portion of information as a reward. When Terrence's order was passed down, Quess, who had filled his stomach, was methodically concocting the potion. He was a quick learner. After learning from Puwu the half-goat and Paru the ogre shaman for some time, he basically had no problem brewing potions now. With the help of various professional tools, it was naturally no problem. As for the interrogation just now, whether it was Rosemary or his psionic ability, it didn't have much effect. Keys only told the information he wanted to reveal to the right people. And according to his judgment of the situation, whether it was the backbone of the gods and not the association, or Tynes, they would most likely agree to his conditions. After all, although the current situation in the broken temple wasn't a critical moment of survival, if they didn't dare to eliminate those biological disasters, others might take advantage of the situation and attack the association's headquarters. Even if they mobilized their forces, they would definitely be able to clean up those enemies. But that would also cause them to lose face, and make the other factions of Sigil think that the gods and not the association were not as glorious. When that happens, the influence they had painstakingly accumulated might be nibbled away by other associations. While thinking, Keys's hands carefully controlled the burette, mixing another potion ingredient into the liquid in the beaker at a suitable rate. In order to deal with the sporemen, he used a solvent that could attract the distilled bees. Now, he was making another unique potion that was specially made to deal with the yellow musk prowler. When designing the 3 disasters against the gods and not the association, he, Puwu, and Paru had made a careful plan, and each disaster was closely linked to the other. Therefore, to remove those 3 disasters, they had to use a reverse chain removal method. Apart from the young blue dragon who designed all of this, if the gods and not the association found someone else, borrowing the power of the gods could actually solve these problems. To forcefully remove these disasters, it would only push the situation to a worse state. Chapter 635. The situation is going to become even worse. After listening to the vivid and rational explanation of the core members in charge of analysis, everyone could only make a choice based on their instincts of seeking benefits and avoiding harm. Once again, they agreed to Turn's orders and worked hard for him. Reza is still in charge of dealing with those rats. Our Hellscream is still locked on to that area. That's why we should immediately notify everyone and have them drag the battlefield over there. I hope that the headquarters will be able to return to normal before the anti-peak arrives. The Tiefling's way of thinking was somewhat similar to Batsu's. They also liked order and hated chaos. That was why after Terrence took over, everything in the headquarters of the gods and not the gods association was like the gears on a clock. They were all interconnected and didn't allow for any mistakes. Since the God Association had already completed their preliminary investigation of Keys and decided to use his potion to eliminate the carnivorous plants, the God Association would do their best to provide whatever resources and materials the young blue dragon needed within the specified time frame. The stinger of a 66-year-old scorpion demon, the dried feces of a 100-year-old scorpion tiger, the bony tail of a 10-year-old monster, all sorts of strange materials were brought to Keys as the ingredients for diluting the herbicide solution. If I had known earlier, I would have brought Puwu here. Even though Keys had already listened to the God Association's detailed explanation of how to make the herbicide solution, he still felt somewhat worried when he saw so many materials. Fortunately, it wasn't difficult to process these materials. Sui Xiong only needed to put them all into a suitable large cauldron, then pour in clear water and boil them for half an hourglass. Finally, he would rinse off all the residue and leave behind a solution that could be used to dilute the herbicide solution. Sui Xiong mixed this solution with the original herbicide solution and poured it into the leather pouch that was originally used to store the herbicide solution. This was originally a pouch that Puwu had prepared for diluting the herbicide solution, and finally, Sui Xiong connected the pouch to the bottom of the spray bottle with an ingenious connection. Everything was done. Keys carried the bag full of herbicide potions on his back as he waited for the Tiefling guards to summon him to do some weeding. "You're really efficient. You can concoct so many potions in such a short time." The captain of the guards greeted the young blue dragon, and then motioned him to follow behind him. "We're going to the place where Master Lissa is fighting with the scoundrels. The others will attract most of the carnivorous plants there. You have to control the dosage of the potion. Don't worry. I'm a professional. The Tiefling Guard captain even prepared several terror hogs as mounts for his team in order to increase their travel speed. Due to the fact that Keys had been fed a few pieces of smoked meat in advance to soothe his emotions, coupled with the unique shock-absorbing saddle, Keys didn't feel particularly bumpy when he was running. The terror hog's gigantic tusks could even topple over the rubble and debris in its path. Riding this creature through the broken temple area was truly the best choice. It didn't take long for them to arrive at their destination. The Tiefling Guard captain jumped off the saddle and patted the terror hog's front leg. The trained mounts automatically spread out to guard the area for possible enemies. Since Keys didn't have any special preparations to make in advance, he put down the bag full of herbicide potions and sat on a rock that wasn't covered by moss and vines. He watched the battle in the distance with great interest. It had been nearly 3 hourglasses since Sui Xiong left for the Place of Truth to meet with fiends and concoct more potions. However, the Gods Association's Vice President Lissa still hadn't been able to completely eliminate the enemy. Not only that, but the outer defensive line of the broken temple had been broken through. Apart from Rufo's group of Equart monks, there were also 4 or 5 adventurer teams of various sizes on the battlefield. Even Lissa himself was forced to personally fight against some of the spellcasters. With Keys's experience, he was naturally able to tell just how strong these spellcasters were. They're all experienced fighters. However, I don't think they've ever joined a proper army before. They lack the most basic tactical awareness. Plus, most of the spellcasters in the group are priests or druids, not mages or warlocks. That's why it's highly likely that these newcomers are believers of some god. After waiting for a while, the Tiefling Guard captain standing next to Sui Xiong suddenly said, "Our spellcasters sent us a message. Those carnivorous plants are about to appear in large numbers. You should prepare yourself." The Blue Dragon youth nodded in agreement. He then began to adjust the potion he was about to shoot. He named it the Yellow Musk Prowler Potion and fastened the metal clasp on it, locking it securely. After Quest was done with his preparations, a cloud of yellow smoke drifted across the dilapidated walls in the distance. However, although this smoke was faint, it was filled with an indescribable stench. If ordinary creatures breathed in this smoke, they would not only feel nauseous, but they would also feel dizzy and their bodies would stiffen. At that time, they would become a delicious meal for these carnivorous plants. A dozen tiefling warriors covered their noses and mouths as they circled around the ruins of the collapsed temple and rushed towards Keys. They were the lucky ones who had already completed their mission, while the unlucky ones were left behind, closely chasing after their former companions. The yellow musk prowler was a terrifying carnivorous plant. They often grew in haunted graveyards, terrifying battlefields, and other places where the soil was soaked in death. This plant's reproduction method was extremely terrifying. They would spread their pollen to stun their prey, then use their roots to drill into their prey's brain and torso. They used this method to infect their victims. Those who were already dead would be revived as a unique type of zombie. Since these zombies were not created by necromancy magic, but rather by plants growing on their bodies, the yellow musk prowler zombies did not possess the characteristics of undead creatures. They could not be harmed by positive energy, nor could they be healed by negative energy. These zombies would take new yellow musk prowlers with them and wander around the wilderness, tirelessly searching for new victims. There were more than 5,000 yellow musk creepers following behind the tiefling warriors. They had originally been scattered throughout the Temple of Ruins, but they had been attracted by a company of tiefling guards and gathered in one place. The tiefling guard squadron originally had 300 people, but after this dangerous mission, only a dozen or so survivors were left. Chapter 636. Facing the rolling yellow musk prowlers, Keys raised the spray bottle in his hand, pulled the trigger, and shot out a bunch of insecticide. Unlike the sporemen, these insecticides were not sprayed directly on the yellow musk prowlers. Instead, they formed a well pattern on the ground, densely blocking the path of the undead plant monsters. The insecticides that were sprayed out had an unpleasant smell, but they did not have any special color. After being sprayed on the ground, it was stained with a lot of dust. The solution should be quite sticky, like glue. Do we need to retreat a little and wait for the insecticides to take effect? After all, the terrain here is not good for defense. Seeing Keys continuously spraying the insecticides, the Tiefling Guard captain standing next to him could not help but remind him. "No need," Keys replied confidently. "In fact, the insecticides are already taking effect. You just—" Before he could say the word "don't worry," a series of popping sounds rang out like bubbles bursting. The well-shaped ground that was sprayed with the insecticides began to bulge, and many insects the size of calves crawled out. They were covered in an amber carapace, and they had forked horns on their heads like the unicorn beetles. This was an insect that lived in the caves under Sigil City. Their scientific name was fire dung beetles. When a large number of fire dung beetles appeared, the slightly intelligent yellow musk prowlers all hesitated. But as their natural enemy, the fire dung beetles did not show any mercy because of their cowardice. They were never soft-hearted towards food and incubation nests. Like dung beetles, the fire dung beetles lifted a large amount of soil and covered the yellow musk prowlers one by one. Then, they used some kind of special spell-like ability to turn the soil into sticky mud. After doing this, the fire dung beetles used the forked horns on their heads to shovel the yellow musk prowlers that were trapped in the mud and forcefully push them forward. Like a rolling snowball, the fire dung beetles rolled the other zombies into the mud ball. When the volume of the mud ball expanded to a certain extent and the mud could no longer bind the prisoners inside, they would stick out their abdomens and poke into the mud ball. Then they would suddenly release a fart. The fire dung beetles were named because of this characteristic. Flammable and explosive gas would be injected into the capillaries of the mud ball. Under the pressure, it would ignite and cause a violent explosion. Due to the characteristics of the yellow musk creepers plants, the flames were extremely lethal to them. Furthermore, they were trapped in the mud ball and had no way to escape. The explosion and flames would kill them completely. If the fire dung beetles sensed that there were still living yellow musk creeper zombies in the mud ball, it would continue to fart a few more times. While the fire dung beetles were rolling the mud ball, some of the yellow musk prowlers that were further away wanted to escape. However, they could not walk with their 2 legs, so how could they outrun the fire dung beetles that had 6 legs? Those that wanted to escape were all trapped in the mud ball by the fire dung beetles and pushed back. They were piled together with the other mud balls that had already been inactivated. When all the yellow musk prowlers were cleared out, the fire dung beetles began to dig the well-shaped hole that Keys had drawn out earlier. When the hole was large enough, they would push the mud balls in. Like billiard balls, the mud balls that trapped the yellow musk prowlers disappeared into the hole one by one. These bugs left just like that? The Tiefling Guard captain held a broadsword in his hand, and did not relax his vigilance against the fire dung beetles until all the bugs disappeared. Don't they also hunt normal people? The target of his question was undoubtedly Keys, who was testing other insecticides. But before the young blue dragon could answer, someone answered his question in advance. The fire dung beetles are not hunting humans. They do not kill indiscriminately. They are working diligently to find suitable food for the common nest of their race, and find a more suitable place for the next generation to hatch. Those yellow musk prowlers are more suitable for these bugs compared to normal people. So, when there is enough harvest, the fire dung beetles will naturally retreat. A few humans wearing various clothes appeared near the Tiefling Guard captain. The terror hog that he had arranged to be on guard did not play its role at all. The one who spoke was a middle-aged woman. She was wearing a linen shirt and a plate armor that seemed to be made of the shell of a large insect. She was holding a wooden staff with both ends wrapped in iron. On the surface of her armor, there was an image of a giant wasp surrounded by a large group of insects. This was the holy emblem of the goddess of insects and diligence, Borum, who was in the neutral camp and had the title of Queen of the Nest. Since this woman was able to come to the heart of the broken temple and had the holy emblem of a goddess on her, it was obvious who she was. "Get into formation and defend against the priests of these false gods," the Tiefling Guard captain shouted loudly. Several of the Tiefling Guards immediately responded. They spontaneously formed a small circular formation with Quess in the center. "Move closer to Vice President Lisa's main formation." As they moved, a forest barbarian wearing a fur vest and a combat belt suddenly jumped out from the group of humans standing together with Borum's priest. He loudly shouted the name of the goddess he believed in, "For the glory of Rag." He waved the two-handed sword in his hand and rushed towards the Tiefling Guards like a ferocious bear. It was quite obvious that he was not a believer of Borum. Instead, he was a priest of the god of strength and beasts, Rag, who was also a member of the god of strength, Rag's faction. Just like the person he served, this forest barbarian had a fiery temper as well as a passion for battle. However, his actions undoubtedly disrupted the Tiefling squad's battle plan. "Brainless barbarian, we're not here to fight," a rogue priest in the group cursed while jumping up and down. Although this group of priests was made up of various gods with different abilities, they were here to punish the various blasphemous acts of the gods. However, they weren't here to fight on the battlefield. They had a plan that needed to be carried out. "Ignore him. Let him pin down this Tiefling squad," Borum, the leader of the Tiefling squad, said. "While they're fighting, we can sneak closer to where the battle is going on and give that guy some rat supplements." Chapter 637. Rag's followers really are like angry bears. They fight as if they don't care about their lives. Surrounded by the Tiefling Guards, Keyes calmly observed the wild behavior of the Rag priest at close range. After a series of desperate attacks, the forest barbarian had broken up their small circle formation. Of course, the Rag priest also suffered some injuries. However, under the effect of the divine spell, minor wounds healing, the wounds caused by the halberds quickly healed and formed scabs. Moreover, he didn't seem to care about his injuries at all. This had to do with the teachings he believed in, as well as his years of adventuring. He had to fight with all kinds of beasts and monsters almost every day. Injuries wouldn't make him retreat. Instead, the pain would arouse his desire to kill. With such a brother valiant warrior at the front, the other priests in the team were happy to relax. They followed behind Keyes and the Tiefling Guards and killed their way to the area where Reza and Eckwert's warrior monks were fighting. "Why did you come here?" After sending out a fireball and repelling a druid Ohei Baidu, who had transformed into an eagle, the vice president of the Gods Association used a high-level teleportation spell and personally asked this question. He had already learned of Thene's arrangements, so he was very puzzled when the team tasked with weeding left their posts without permission. Lord Reza, a few false god priests suddenly appeared over there. "They're a bit difficult to deal with." Before the captain of the Tiefling Guards could finish speaking, this royal warlock raised a finger and shot a weakening ray at the Rag priest who was closely following behind the weeding team. There was no doubt that the spell hit its target. The wild, bear-like forest barbarian couldn't help but stagger and almost fall to the ground. "I'll take care of them. You guys follow the established plan and quickly take care of all the carnivorous plants," Reza said coldly. Then, he turned around and looked at Keyes. Sensing Reza's gaze, the young blue dragon patted the bulging potion pouch on his back, indicating that he was ready. Sigil City Lair Morgue. The incinerator burned day and night, and the irritating smell that filled the workshop made it easier for many living people to become tired. However, compared to other places in the lair, working in the morgue was not only better, but it was also safer. After today's anti-peak, I have to go to Baylor's Graynale, to play some cards and have a few drinks. Otherwise, I won't be able to sleep. Curly Hair, who was in charge of controlling the fire in the furnace, touched his shiny head and secretly made arrangements for his nightlife. After settling the funeral of a smelly moss troll customer, Curly Hair, who was in charge of controlling the flames in the furnace, touched his shiny head and secretly made arrangements for his nightlife. However, just as Curly Hair was contemplating whether he would have enough money to spend another night with a lady he was familiar with on the streets, he suddenly saw a sneaky figure. That guy, isn't it his day off today? It turned out that he saw a colleague who was not supposed to be here today. That fellow is most likely working for the scouting party. These ratmen love to betray outsiders the most. Curly Hair came up with a more reasonable answer after thinking about it for a while. At the same time, a playful smile appeared on his face. Looks like I'm going to get rich today. He slung the shovel over his shoulder and swaggered over to his Ratman colleague. From Curly Hair's point of view, what the other party was doing was an opportunity. Before coming to Sigil City, Curly Hair had been a street boss in a place called Soft Maple City for a long time. However, because a gang called Broom Brows suddenly rose to prominence, he had no choice but to embark on a journey of exile. Later on, due to a freak combination of factors, he came to Sigil City. As he still had some ability, he was not afraid that the Rat Man would have other thoughts. Curly Hair felt that as long as he caught that guy and threatened him, the other party would have to obediently give him a sum of hush money. That way, his nightlife at night would be more exciting. Hi! He walked up behind the Rat Man and wanted to greet him and intimidate him. However, before he could finish his sentence, he heard a piercing sound. A jagged dagger had pierced through Curly Hair's back and into his heart. Before he could fall to the ground, an arm supported his limp body. You're a little late. Half of the face of a Cambion demon emerged from behind Curly Hair's corpse. This mixed-blood demon used his yellow eyes to stare at the Rat Man who had just come to his senses and was covering his mouth with his hand to stop himself from screaming. The item is in the third compartment of the tool room. After saying that, this Cambion demon dragged Curly Hair into the depths of the workshop. The Rat Man could faintly hear the door of the incinerator turning and the sound of a shovel being used to fill the combustion chamber with coal. After taking a deep breath, the Rat Man calmed himself down and walked briskly to the tool room at the entrance. Following the Cambion demon's instructions, he quickly found a box containing what he needed: a bottle of light blue blood, a long jagged dagger, and an inconspicuous decayed tooth. Looking at the bottle of blood, the Rat Man's heartbeat suddenly accelerated. A hint of greed flashed in his eyes, but it was immediately washed away by the intense fear that surged from the bottom of his heart. He patted his face and hurriedly put these things into a small pocket beside him. Then, he walked briskly to the staff exit of the large morgue. Thick smoke constantly emitted from the chimney of the large morgue, forming a dark mist. The nearby streets were always illuminated in a nighttime environment. Taking advantage of this night, the Rat Man nimbly passed by the rows of funeral shops. After making several turns in the small alleys, he finally walked out of the range of the lair. From afar, he saw the messenger he had previously reserved. In order to reduce unnecessary losses, Alto Chen never allowed his subordinates to enter the lair to receive parcels. The messenger was standing across the street. After verifying the ciphertext provided previously and paying 3 times the fee of ordinary mailing, the Rat Man gave the messenger the address for the parcel to be delivered. Because he paid 3 times the fee, he enjoyed the silent express delivery service launched by Alto Chen. The messenger took the parcel and put it in his backpack. Then, at a speed faster than human eyes could capture, he darted into the shadows around the street. From the moment he received the mailing address to the moment he left, the messenger didn't say a single word. The Rat Man didn't even hear him breathe. Chapter 638. Greater Choke Hold. The tiefling warlock Risa took out a handkerchief and quickly tied a knot. Priest Rag, who was fighting with the guards, immediately grabbed his throat. No matter how hard he tried to inhale, he could only breathe out more than he breathed in. Soon, this strong forest barbarian's face turned ashen, and his legs became weak. In this situation, even if he could have dodged the attacks, it was now difficult to dodge. In an instant 2 or 3 wounds appeared on his chest from the halberds. Just as he was about to be stabbed in the chest by a halberd, his captain, Priest Boruame, reacted quickly and blocked the attack with a wooden stick. At the same time, the female priest cast 2 divine spells on him and finally dispelled the effects of Greater Chokehold. With his teammates protecting him, the forest barbarian propped his 2-handed sword on the ground and gasped for breath, taking the opportunity to recover some strength. The one who replaced him in the front row was Boruame's priest. As she chanted a prayer, the insect shell armor on her body seemed to come to life and quickly covered her entire body, forming a solid exoskeleton. With just a slight push, this priest Boruame jumped into the air and dodged the attacks of several tieflings with their halberds. Not only that, but several throwing knives had also appeared in her hands at some unknown time. With a whoosh, the throwing knives flew towards the soldiers waiting for her. Skaven, come and kill this target. The vice president of the Gods Association had just cast a defensive spell on himself when he noticed that the other tiefling guards had also been hit by the arrows. Not only that, the throwing knives had been dipped in poison beforehand. The injured soldiers were all foaming at the mouth. Risa couldn't help but roar. After calling for reinforcements, he suddenly thought of something and turned around to see if Keys had also been hit by the throwing knife. Fortunately, the young blue dragon was unharmed. When the throwing knives arrived, he hid behind the rubble next to him and used the cover to avoid this wave of attack. That was why he was the only survivor apart from the tiefling warlock. However, in order to make it more realistic, Keys still took out the Wailing Man and aimed. It looked as if he was going to use the double-barreled gun in his hand to find an opportunity to ruthlessly shoot Boruame's priest. You yourself. Before Lisa could finish her warning, the priest fell from the sky and landed on the ground. The impact created a small hole in the ground. As she landed, the armor on her body opened up several rows of small holes. Poo-pee-you-pee-you. The dark brown smoke was like a cannonball, shooting out wave after wave, and soon connecting into one. Everything within a dozen meters of Nyeyen suddenly became pitch black. The vice president, Lisa, hurriedly cast 2 defensive spells on himself, which could resist the poison and prevent physical attacks. Then he used the wind creation spell to disperse the thick smoke. Only then did he realize that a face with insect-like compound eyes was right in front of him. His footsteps turned sharply as he desperately retreated. As he retreated, he shouted, "Skaven! Snipe! Puff! Bang! Bang!" 3 consecutive gunshots were fired in succession. It was impossible to tell which one came from which. The first was the crisp firing sound of the Rat King, Skaven, pulling the lever of the Poison Fang rifle. The last 2 gunshots were like firecrackers. They came from the barrel of the Wailing Man in Keys's hand. There was no doubt that Skaven's target was Boruame, who was approaching Lisa. And Keys's targets were the jungle barbarian who was rushing toward him and a rogue who was close to him at some point. As the saying goes, no matter how good your skills are, you will be shot down. The few priests who were performing amazingly just now fell to the ground almost at the same time. The bullet fired from Skaven's Poison Fang shattered the compound eyes of Boruame's priest and flew out from the back of her head. After being shot by Keys at close range, the chest of the brawny jungle barbarian was badly mutilated. The rogue had lost half of his body, leaving only the lower half of his body twitching on the ground. The situation was not bad. The priest team, which was very likely to cause trouble and bring variables to President Barnes's plan, was now almost completely wiped out. Next, as long as, before Lisa could breathe a sigh of relief, something unexpected suddenly happened. Like a train that had been derailed, it suddenly became uncontrollable. Originally surrounded by the soldiers of the Gods Association, the Eckwart monk group, which was about to face the end of the world, unexpectedly caused a new trouble. The monk leader, Rufo, who had transformed into a ferocious rat in human form, had a long serrated dagger in his right hand. His left hand was tightly holding a quartz bottle, which was rippling with a light blue color. Gulp, gulp, gulp. Rufo crushed the bottle with his teeth and poured the liquid in the quartz bottle down his throat. Then, he casually threw the bottle, which hit a rock on the ground and broke into 17 or 18 pieces. Several Eckwart monks under him looked at each other and immediately surrounded him. They bent down, grabbed the fragments, and put them into their mouth. Those who did not get the fragments beat their chests regretfully, as if they had lost millions. Ha ha! Grab it, eat it. Don't waste the gift of the great Les Avit. Rufo drank the light blue liquid, and his muscles immediately swelled at a speed visible to the naked eye. His blood vessels became thicker and constantly agitated, as if there were little mice constantly moving through them. Our loyal actions have been exchanged for the blessings of God. Although the changes were not as eye-catching as his, the other Eckwart monks who grabbed the fragments of the quartz bottle and swallowed them all became energetic, as if they had been injected with chicken blood. The fatigue and injuries caused by the previous battle were all gone. Some faint light spots appeared on their blue skin, as if fluorescent lights were flickering. Blood of God! The obscure energy fluctuation touched Keys. Benefiting from the valuable experience of killing the camel god and enraging the tyrant worm, he immediately realized what was inside the quartz bottle. The god of mice and bats had given the essence and blood of his true body to the leader of the Eckwart monk group, forcibly raising him from a mortal to a divine creature. Chapter 639. The Lady of Pain did not allow gods to set foot in Sigil City, but she did not make any additional requirements for divine creatures. As long as they did not attempt to subvert the rule of the Queen, neither the lady herself nor the Dabbas under her command would treat them with hostility or directly expel them. As long as they behaved themselves, it was not impossible for them to live in Sigil City for the rest of their lives. As long as they did not make any mistakes, such as rushing into the broken temple on a whim and destroying the already broken and collapsed walls more thoroughly. For example, like what Rufo was doing now, he launched the sacred emblem of Les Avit, a palm burning with blue flames, into the sky in the form of fireworks to announce to all the gods and non-members of the Gods Guild, the power of the gods is beyond your imagination. Thanks to the bottle of Les Avit's divine blood, Rufo was directly promoted to a legendary monk. Although he had not yet learned some exclusive moves and skills, the destructive power of his every move was far from comparable to before. The only flaw was that the power brought by the divine blood made him crazy. In his eyes, except for Les Avit, all existences were ants. Huge bat wings stretched out from his back. Coupled with the humanoid ferocious rat image, he looked like some kind of genetically modified demon. Waving the extended serrated dagger in his hand, he easily tore a crack in the army of the gods and non-members of the Gods Guild. The corpses that fell to the ground after being stabbed were all drained of blood and turned into disgusting mummies. This was the powerful vampire's touch enhanced by divine power. He liked to add magic to the flying dagger he carried with him the most. By inflicting more pain on the opponent, it could restore the user's energy, heal the wounds on the body, and then maintain long-term combat effectiveness. It could even make the user stronger as the battle went on. Suffer, wail, and then die in despair. Hearing this declaration full of chunibu, Keys could not help but want to laugh. As expected, The gifts of the gods are all arsenic with honey added to it. Even if they only drink such a small bottle of the divine blood, the believers will become as if they have a halo that reduces intelligence. It's just that I don't know if President Barnes has enough nerves, or how long he can endure. The answer was not long. A meteor fell from the sky and hit the blue burning palm that would never disappear for some reason, directly shattering the fireworks of the sacred emblem that Rufo released. Then, an old but powerful roar came from the depths of the broken temple. Ignorant scoundrels, fools who believe in false gods, villains who dare to tarnish the honor of the association. I will crush you into dust. With a flash of dazzling light, President Barnes descended on the battlefield. He slammed the burning lamp scepter in his hand on the ground and announced with a powerful voice. The words that came out of Tyne's mouth seemed to have some kind of magic. Before his voice died away, Rufo, who was said to be crushed into a speck of dust, fell from the sky and crashed into a pile of rubble, stirring up a large amount of dust. You will fear the darkness, and the darkness will always follow you like a shadow, appearing and disappearing around you. It was as if Rufo was hit by dark fear and dark magic at the same time. Before he could struggle to get up, a large number of shadows formed by spells gushed out around him and tightly wrapped him up. Immediately after, a scream filled with fear came out from the shadows, causing those who heard it to shudder. So he is a truth mage. With his own experience and the knowledge brought by the excessive dragon heritage, Keyes confirmed Barnes' profession with a few glances. Learning such an unpopular profession, I'm afraid this guy's family was really rich when he was young. The so-called truth mage could also be called true master teachers. To become a true master teacher, one must have enough intelligence to study a magical language that contained the truth of all things. Through learning this language, they would try to master as many true names as possible to understand and explain the mysteries of the multiverse. In the beginning, low-level true master teachers could only chant their true names in a very limited way. Their power was very limited, and they only knew a few true names. More importantly, their ability to chant their true names was not perfect. For example, they might be able to increase the combat power of their allies or freeze their opponents in place, but they could not command demons or change the terrain. However, with the improvement of their experience and casting skills, true master teachers could learn to name in a more reasonable way. Although even gods were unable to grasp the true names of all things, this didn't stop true great teachers from observing all things. Through in-depth observation, they could try to use their own methods to come up with a name for other things. In other words, they could name things. After having the ability to name, true master teachers could be said to have found the correct path. Only then could the true power of this profession be fully unleashed. And the only way to improve the ability to name was to continuously increase one's knowledge and observe as many things as possible. Only in this way could true master teachers continue to temper their speaking skills. However, this required a lot of support from resources. If one wanted to push the profession level of true master teachers to a certain level, they would need to spend tens of times more resources and money than spellcasters. For example, if you bought 1 gram of all the elements in the periodic table, the price you would have to pay couldn't be calculated with money. And if one wanted to raise the rank of true master teachers, the types of things they needed to observe were not as simple as gathering the periodic table of elements. It was because of this that Keyes had said that Tyne's family had a mine. However, Keyes was still too young. He did not know that the main reason Tynes could become a true master teacher was because he had a good father. This god was not a blood relative of the chairman of the theocracy. He was not an ordinary Batsu, but one of the Dark Eight. The Dark Eight are the master of the 9 prisons of Bader, the 8 trusted subordinates of the Astamors. They control all the military forces in Nessus, the 9th level of Bader, apart from an army of 1,000 pit fiends. Their current job is to assist or rather monitor the acting Lord of Bader, Bardi, and do their best to establish an advantage for the Batsu people in the Blood War. Tynes was a second generation in name only. It was because of this relationship that he had the ability to gather the inheritance of the ancient Tiefling Empire and start anew in Sigil, starting from scratch to establish the theocracy. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.